This happened a few years back when I first moved to a small town in northern Minnesota for work. I didn't know anyone there yet, so for the first few weeks I spent most of my time either working or sitting around the same couple local spots, just trying to get a feel for the place. One afternoon, I was sitting at dinner off the highway, and this older lady at the counter randomly started talking to me. I guess that she figured that I was new because I asked the waitress where the nearest grocery store was. She ended up giving me a bunch of advice about the area too. Where not to drive in the winter, which gas station overcharged, stuff like that. A pretty normal conversation, really. But then, out of nowhere, she asked where I lived. I told her roughly which road my rental house was on, and she immediately got really serious, like her tone completely changed. She pointed toward the north side of town and said something along the lines of, "Stay away from the forest along County Road 12. I kind of laughed at this because I assumed that she meant wildlife or something. There are bears and wolves around that part of Minnesota after all. But she sort of shook her head and said, "No, I mean it. Don't stop near those trees. That place isn't right. My husband literally disappeared out there." She said it in a really eerie and sort of calm way, which honestly made it more uncomfortable. Apparently, though, her husband had gone missing years earlier after pulling over on the highway next to that exact stretch of forest. According to her, he stopped because he thought that someone needed help, and his truck was later found parked with the driver door open and the hazards flashing. He was eventually found dead several miles into the woods. I didn't ask any more questions after that. I just kind of nodded and I finished my food. At the time, I figured that it was probably just a tragic situation mixed with local rumors or something like that. Small towns are full of stories like that after all. Still though, I remembered what she said because that road was actually part of my commute to work. For the first couple of weeks, nothing unusual happened too. It was just a normal rural highway really. 2 lanes, no streetlights, forest running along one side of the long stretch there. But then one night, something weird actually did happen out there. So I worked late that evening, and by the time that I left the office, it was already dark. The drive back to my place, it took about 25 minutes, and about halfway through it, I reached that same wooded area the woman had mentioned. Up ahead, I noticed flashing hazard lights on the side of the road. At first, I assumed it was just someone with car trouble. Happens all the time in the winter up there. As I got closer, I could see the vehicle clearly. It was an older station wagon pulled halfway onto the gravel shoulder. It was beige color with fake wood paneling on the sides. The driver's door was open and the interior light was on. No one was visible in the seat. Because the door was open though and the hazards were going, I figured that maybe someone collapsed or needed help, so I pulled over a little ways behind it and turned my hazards on. I grabbed a flashlight from my glove box and I walked over there. The car, it looked almost weirdly too clean for how old it was. No rust, windows spotless, tires were really fine, and it didn't look like a broken down car at all, in fact. I leaned down and shined the flashlight into the front seat. Nobody inside. I walked around the car thinking that maybe the driver had gotten out and walked toward the trees for some reason or something. I called out a few times asking if anyone needed help. But again, there was nothing. No sound at all, in fact, except for the car's blinking hazard lights and the wind through the trees that night. I even checked the back seat and the trunk area through the window, but still nothing. At that point, I must admit that I started to feel a little bit uneasy. Not in a sort of supernatural way or anything, but just in this sort of, wow, this situation is a bit weird kind of way. The forest line, though, was right there, maybe 15 feet away from the road. It was extremely dark past those first row of trees, though. In fact, my flashlight barely reached past the brush, and I shined the light inside for a few seconds and yelled again, asking if somebody was out there and if they needed help, but still, nothing. Eventually, I figured the best thing to do was to just report it. So I walked back to my car and called the county non-emergency line. I left a message explaining that there was an abandoned vehicle with its hazards on along County Road 12. I also wrote down the license plate while I was sitting there, and then I drove home. Now, about 10 minutes after I got inside, my phone rang. It was someone from the sheriff's office returning the call. I explained the situation again, and when I finished describing the car, the dispatcher paused for a second and then asked me to repeat the license plate number, so I did. There was another pause. Then the dispatcher said something really strange. She told me that they'd received calls describing that exact same vehicle in that exact location multiple times over the past few decades. Same color, same model, same license plate. Honestly, at first I thought that she was joking. I told her that I had literally just been standing next to it, in fact. She responded by saying that apparently officers had checked that same area many times after similar reports and had never found a vehicle there when they arrived. Then she told me something else that made the whole situation way worse. So, apparently the husband of a woman who used to live in town had gone missing near that same stretch of road many years ago. His truck, it had been found parked with the hazards on and the door open in almost the exact same spot. His body was discovered days later, several miles inside of the forest. The dispatcher didn't elaborate much after that, and she told me that if I ever saw the vehicle again, not to stop and to just keep driving. And that was the end of the call. I tried not to think about it too much after that. I figured that there had to be some sort of normal explanation for it after all. But a few months later, I started carpooling with a coworker named Jason, who also lived near my area. And one morning, while we were driving past that same section of road, I casually asked him if he had ever heard anything about a car showing up there at night. He immediately said, "You mean the Engel story?" I hadn't mentioned any names yet, which caught my attention. Jason told me the story had been floating around town for years, apparently, and according to him, a man named Robert Engel disappeared near the forest in the late 1970s. His pickup had been found exactly the way that the older woman described: hazards flashing, driver's door open, interior light on. Search teams eventually found him dead miles into the woods. The official ruling was suicide, but apparently his wife never really believed that explanation. Jason said after the husband died that the police kept getting calls about a standard station wagon parked along the same road. Every time the officers went to check it out, nothing was there too. Eventually, they traced many of the calls back to the widow's house. People assumed that she must have become unstable after losing her husband. And that's basically where the story ended. Well, for most people in town anyway. I didn't tell Jason that I had actually stopped out there for that car myself. I just sort of sat there listening while he talked. But the weirdest part came later that night when we were driving home. So we passed that same stretch of road again, and Jason sort of randomly added something that he had forgotten earlier. You see, apparently, years before Robert Engel disappeared, he himself had once reported seeing an abandoned station wagon parked there. Same color, same wood paneling, same license plate. Jason laughed about it like it was just one of those small-town ghost stories. But I certainly didn't laugh at that moment. Because the car that I saw that night, well, it matched that exact description. Same color, same wood sides, same plate. And when I stopped, my own car ended up sitting behind it with the hazards on and the driver's door open while I walked around looking for, well, someone out there. Which, according to the story, was exactly how Robert Engel's truck was found before he walked into the woods and, well, died. I haven't stopped on that road since then, and if I ever see hazard lights up ahead on that stretch again, I am definitely not stopping, and will just be driving straight past it. I'm 56 now, but this happened when I was about 31, back in the summer of like 2001 or something. I was living in a small rental on the outskirts of Florida, in a quiet neighborhood surrounded by woods and empty lots. Everyone tells me that I shouldn't believe it, but I cannot shake it, and I know what I saw. It was late afternoon, around 7 p.m., the sun just dipping behind the trees, so the room was lit by this weird greenish gold glow. My husband and I were both napping, and I was on the left side of the bed curled up, facing the wall. Suddenly, I felt this weight in the air, like someone was standing right there. My eyes opened slowly, and there it was. A small grey figure, barely over 3 feet tall, standing at the foot of the bed. Its head was enormous in proportion to its body. The eyes were black, huge and unblinking. No mouth, no nose that I could see, just eyes that felt like they were staring right through me. I was frozen. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream, and my mind screamed at my body to react, but it just wouldn't. I tried to reach for my husband, to wake him, and after what felt like a full minute of paralysis, I finally could move enough to whisper his name. The figure, though, was now gone. No sound, no flash of light, nothing but the normal shadows in the room. What made it different from dreams or sleep paralysis, though, was the room itself. Everything was exactly how it had been. The furniture, the light through the blinds, even the slight hum of the fridge. It was all exactly the same. I wasn't somewhere else, I was in my own room, seeing something that shouldn't exist. After that night, strange things started happening too. Lights would flicker randomly, even when bulbs were fine, and my cat, normally fearless, would hiss at empty corners of the bedroom. I kept waking up feeling like I wasn't alone too, even though my husband was right there. Once, I woke to a faint tapping on the window, like tiny claws on the glass, but nothing was outside. A few months later, I rented a small storage unit to clear out some old furniture, and one night I stayed late organizing some boxes. The lights were pretty harsh there, fluorescent, and flickered intermittently from time to time. And that's when I saw a shadow move in the corner of the unit. I instantly froze, my heart pounding. A small humanoid silhouette darted behind a stack of crates, and I convinced myself at the time that it must have been a trick of the light or my eyes or something, but the shape was wrong. Too small and too disproportionate. I started keeping a journal of everything unusual that I experienced. Doors left ajar when I knew that I had closed them, strange noises in the yard at night, tiny steps and rustling like something moving just beyond the tree line. Once, my husband swore that he even saw a small figure in the living room that disappeared when he flipped the light on one night. The worst incident, though, that happened in 2003. So I was home alone one evening doing some dishes. The kitchen window overlooked the backyard, which ended at the woods behind the house. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something small dart between the trees. It paused and looked toward the window, and I could see those eyes again. I dropped the dish towel and ran to lock the door. It wasn't gone when I checked, but just standing at the edge of the tree line, motionless, like completely still too, like a statue, just watching. I never tried to approach it. I didn't call anyone. I didn't want to. I kept a low profile, kept the lights on at night, and stopped going out after sunset. The presence, it never attacked me or anything. It never even spoke to me, but it was always there, just watching. Even now, I get triggered by anything with large black eyes, movies, photos, cartoons. It sets off the same sort of panic that I felt that first night. What haunts me, though, isn't the creature itself. It's the certainty that something exists that we cannot explain, that saw me in my own bedroom and didn't need to make a sound, and that left me with the knowledge that I was completely powerless in that moment. I've thought about trying to investigate, but honestly, I don't want to. I've seen enough, and I just want to live my life normally and pretend like I didn't see it. Even though I know that I never will. I'm sharing this because the whole thing started getting into my head and I honestly didn't know who to talk about it. I'm not really someone who believes in supernatural stuff myself, so at first I assumed that there had to be some sort of normal explanation for it. But after a few weeks of this happening, I started getting genuinely unsettled. Mostly because I live alone a lot of the time. So, some quick background. I'm 26 and I live with my girlfriend in an old duplex in a small town. The building itself is pretty old, built sometime in the late 1920s, according to the property listing at least. And it's one of those narrow two-story places where the staircase goes straight up from the living room and the bedroom is basically right at the top of the stairs. It's cheap rent, creaky floors, and thin walls. Now, about 2 months ago, something weird started happening when I was either just falling asleep or just waking up. I would open my eyes and think that I saw someone standing in the corner of the room. Usually it looked like a person-shaped shadow, not detailed, just the outline of somebody standing there. The moment that I'd actually move or turn on a light, though, it would be gone. The first few times I brushed it off immediately, as you can probably imagine. I figured that it was that thing where your brain is still sort of half dreaming or whatever. I'd heard people talk about that before, in fact. But it kept happening. Sometimes it looked like a person standing near the door, and other times it looked like somebody leaning near the dresser. Once it looked like something sitting at the foot of the bed. None of them moved or spoke. They just stayed there for maybe 10 or 20 seconds and then disappeared once I fully woke up. I mentioned it to my girlfriend casually one morning, and she basically laughed at it and said that I was probably just exhausted. Honestly, too, at the time, I just sort of agreed with her. But then something happened about 3 weeks ago that made everything a lot harder to ignore. My girlfriend had stayed the night at her sister's place because they had to leave for an early road trip the next morning, so I was alone in the house that night. Around midnight, I went to bed and I fell asleep pretty quickly. But sometime later, I woke up to the sound of somebody walking upstairs. Our stairs are pretty loud, so it's easy to hear when somebody is coming up there. I remember hearing 2 or maybe 3 steps and then what sounded like somebody quietly talking. My first thought was that my girlfriend had come home early and was on the phone or something. Our bedroom doesn't have a normal door. The previous tenant had replaced it with this weird sort of heavy curtain thing. I heard the curtain shift like somebody pushed through it. At that point, I was still half asleep and facing the wall, and then the mattress tipped behind me. Not slightly either. It felt exactly like when somebody crawls into bed. I mean, I could feel the mattress compress and shift the way that it does when another person's weight settles on it. A second later, too, I felt what seemed like an arm rest across my side. Since I assumed it was my girlfriend, I didn't question it at all, too. I just stayed there, started drifting back towards sleep, and then something clicked in my brain, and I mean, she wasn't supposed to be home at this point. That realization, it hit me like a jolt of electricity as well. I woke up instantly but didn't move. My brain went straight to the worst possibility that someone had broken into the house and had gotten into bed with me. I was staring at the wall completely stiff, trying to decide what to do next. The pressure behind me, though, was still there. The bed still felt weighed down. I stayed like that for maybe 30 seconds as well, just trying to figure out whether to turn around or run. Finally, though, I decided to do something. I pulled my arm back and swung it behind me as hard as I could, aiming where I thought somebody's head or shoulder would be. And the moment that my arm moved, the weight on the mattress suddenly vanished, just gone. Not like somebody rolled away, not like someone jumped up. It literally just disappeared instantly. I spun around, though, and turned the lamp on. And when I did, the bed was empty. The curtain over the doorway wasn't moving. The room was silent. I got up and checked the entire house, and I mean every room, every closet. The front door was still locked, and There was nothing there. I didn't sleep again that night. And after that night, the weird visual stuff started happening even when I was fully awake during the day, which was really weird. It wasn't constant, but maybe once every few days I'd catch something in my peripheral vision, like someone standing at the top of the stairs or maybe walking past the bathroom door. Every time that I turned my head to look directly, nothing was there though. The shapes were always quick, just a fraction of a second. I started getting really jumpy in my own house too. A week ago, I finally talked to a doctor about it during a walk-in appointment. I explained everything, the shapes, the night with the bed, all of it. The doctor asked a bunch of questions about sleep, stress, caffeine, that kind of thing. And eventually he said something that actually made a lot of sense to me. Apparently there's a sleep issue when your brain wakes up before your body fully does, and during that window, people can experience extremely realistic hallucinations, including seeing figures in the room or feeling pressure on the bed. Some people even feel like somebody is touching them. He said that it's related to the same mechanism as sleep paralysis, but it's a little bit different. When he explained that, the whole thing suddenly sounded way less supernatural to me and way more like my brain glitching out or something like that. I've been trying to fix my sleep schedule since then and cut down on late-night screen time. The episodes haven't happened again for about 10 days now, and that said, the memory of that night, it definitely still sticks with me as terrifying, because even knowing the medical explanation, I can still clearly remember what it felt like when the mattress dipped like that, and that arm rested across my side. And I can honestly say that, in that moment, it felt exactly like somebody else was really there. This happened back in 2004 when I was 25, living in a tiny one-bedroom apartment in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I was sharing the place with my then girlfriend, and it was one of those old buildings with creaky floors and peeling paint. The hallway outside of our apartment, it was dimly lit at night, which always gave the place a bit of a weird vibe, but I tried not to think too much of it. Now, I usually sleep with the lights off, and I kept my bedroom door open like I always did. Never really locked it either, and I mean, it was just me and her, so why even bother, right? That night, I woke up at around 2:30 in the morning to use the bathroom at some stage. Nothing unusual, just the normal half-asleep sort of shuffle across the creaking floors. And after finishing, I went back to bed and I tried to settle back in. I was lying on my left side, facing the door, and I was just drifting back towards sleep when I noticed something. At first, I thought it was a trick of the shadows from the streetlight filtering through the blinds. But then I realized it wasn't a shadow. It was a figure in the doorway. It looked human as well, but wrong. Wrong in every way. It was hunched over with long matted hair hanging past its shoulders, like it hadn't been washed in years. Its skin was pale, almost grey, and there was something grossly bulky about the way that it moved, like it was too big for its frame. The face was mostly obscured, but I swear that I could see a twisted smile. Its eyes, they weren't bright or glowing or anything, but just sort of empty, like it wasn't really alive. I instantly froze. My heart practically jumped out of my chest. My girlfriend was sleeping right next to me, and I didn't want to wake her. I wanted to scream, but my voice felt sort of suddenly trapped. I slowly turned toward her, hoping that maybe I had misseen something, but when I looked back in the doorway, it was standing at the side of the bed now, its bulky shoulder just above the mattress. I tried to ignore it, told myself that I must just be seeing things. But the weird thing is that suddenly the air in the room felt, I don't know, like heavier, like a pressure in my chest, and I couldn't breathe properly. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. Just nothing. Empty doorway, normal bedroom, my girlfriend still asleep. I instantly got up to go and check the door in the hallway, but nothing. No sound, no sign that anyone had even been there. The rest of the apartment was quiet, just the faint hum of the fridge now. I didn't sleep for the rest of that night. I stayed sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the doorway, listening to every little sound that I could. The next morning, I told my girlfriend something weird happened, but I couldn't really explain it. I couldn't make it sound real without sounding insane, I think, and so she shrugged, thinking that I was just spooked by shadows or the old building creaks or whatever. After that night, things escalated slightly over the next week, though. I would wake up hearing like heavy breathing in the room, or the floor creaking like somebody was pacing around, but the apartment was empty. I mean, I checked multiple times. One night I even woke to the sound of scratching at the closet door. Another night I felt a hand brush my arm while I was lying in bed, but when I looked again, there was nothing. I stopped leaving the bedroom door open after that, always locked it, even during the day. I started keeping a baseball bat near my bed too, if that would even help, but eventually I moved out of that apartment about 3 months later. But I've never forgotten that, well, thing really is the best way to describe it. Even now, if I see a shadowy shape in a doorway at night, my stomach instantly drops. I've even scared myself a few times that way, checking the new place, but thankfully nothing's been there yet. I've never really told too many people about this because, well, look, I know how crazy it sounds, and who knows, maybe it was just a hallucination or sleep paralysis or something. But all I can say is that everything felt real. The room didn't change, the shadows matched the furniture. I mean, I think I was awake. I could move after a moment. I can still feel the pressure in the air when I think about it, though, and it's like it was standing there just sort of waiting for something to happen. I have done a little bit of research on this, and I don't know if it was a hag or some kind of a spirit or just my mind going crazy, but I will never leave a door open at night again. That much is for sure. Has anyone else here ever experienced something like this that felt so real that it just could not have been a dream? I'm really not sure how to say this, but I need help making sense of something that happened in my home a few months ago. So we live in Nevada in a 2-story house. The layout is kind of awkward, living room and kitchen at the front, and then a narrow hallway leading to the bedrooms, a small playroom near the backyard, and the garage at the far end. There's a baby gate separating the playroom from the kitchen and the dining area, and all our doors make a distinct sort of thunk sound when opened or closed. On the night that this happened as well, a couple of the windows were open because it was unusually warm for this time of year. Now, Saturday night, my kids went to bed at around 8:15. They're 6 and 9, and bedtime has been a bit chaotic lately. They kept getting up and asking for water, stuffed animals, or just talking and whatnot. You know how kids are, right? But by 9:15, we thought that they were finally asleep, and my husband and I settled down to watch some TV in the living room. Around 10:05, we both heard a door slam, sharp and distinct, and I jumped up to go and check, and it was the bedroom door. When I went to look inside, the 6-year-old was gone. At first I thought that she had wandered into the bathroom or maybe the playroom, but she wasn't there. We literally tore through that house too, under the beds, behind couches, inside of closets, the garage, even the backyard as well. I was calling her name, "Ellie, it's time to come out now." And normally she comes out when I say that, but there was nothing. By 10:35, panic was setting in, and I called 911 while my husband ran up and down the street looking for her everywhere. Our older daughter was still asleep, or so I thought at least. When the police arrived, they checked the house and the yard thoroughly, but still nothing. Even the canine unit was called, and The dog usually picks up scents immediately, but tonight it acted normal, like there was no scent. It was almost midnight when one of the officers looked into the hallway and said, "Wait, who's there?" It was Ellie, just standing in the playroom doorway, calm as if nothing had happened. My husband and I immediately froze. The weird part was that none of us saw her walk past the living room or down the hallway or anything, and our dog, who always barks or jumps when someone moves nearby, didn't react at all. We obviously asked her where she had been all this time, and here's the part that really still haunts me. She said in her little 6-year-old voice, "I went with the nice people. They let me look at the lights. They wanted to see me too, but I came back when they said that it was time." And that was it. Nothing about hiding or about being scared or anything, just that line. My husband and I exchanged looks, and we asked who the nice people were, and she just smiled like it was normal and then just ran to bed. I've read about sleepwalking and dissociative states and even hallucinations in children, but nothing explains how she disappeared, like literally disappeared from that house for nearly 2 hours, how the dog didn't react, and how she could describe seeing something that she shouldn't have. She never said anything more and hasn't repeated it since then, but we moved the baby gate to block off the playroom completely, and I check every night that the doors are locked now, windows are closed, and both kids are accounted for. And I know a lot of people will say kids have wild imaginations or she was sleepwalking or something, but I'm telling you, this was not normal. And I mean, we and the police looked absolutely everywhere, and we just could not find her. So, if anyone has any logical explanation for how a child can disappear from a locked, monitored house for almost 2 hours, with the police searching and canines on the job and everything, without leaving footprints or triggering a dog, I would really, genuinely like to hear it. I live in Washington in an older 2-story house from the 1940s. My wife, me, and our 8-year-old daughter live here. The bedrooms, they're all upstairs, and ours has a small walk-in closet on the far wall. The floorboards in that room creak in certain spots, but usually there's nothing more than just a normal house settling sort of sound. The windows are old and single pane, so sound from the outside is muffled, but you can definitely hear it. Now, a few nights ago, my wife told me that she thought that she heard a woman crying. Soft, broken, almost a whimper coming from the closet in our room. She said that it woke her up, but by the time that she turned on the light, nothing was there. Our daughter also mentioned hearing it once, but she was too scared to go near the closet. Last night, I was sitting in the room saying some personal prayers before bed. I was standing by the closet and clearly heard the same sound. It wasn't soft or distant or anything, too. It felt like it was right next to me, in fact. The crying didn't sound human exactly, I would say. There was almost a mechanical or stuttered sort of quality to it, like a recording played slightly off speed. It was just one short broken cry and then nothing. I kept praying and tried to ignore it, and after I finished, I paced the area where I had heard it, stepping on all the floorboards to see if any of them might have made a similar noise or something, but nothing matched. I even tapped lightly along the walls and the corners. My wife was downstairs watching TV, so I know that it wasn't her. The neighbors live far enough away that a cry really couldn't sound that close. I even went a step further. I checked the closet itself. All the clothes were hanging normally, nothing on the floor, no shadows, no movement. I opened and closed the door several times, tried knocking on the walls, even shined my phone flashlight along the edges, but I couldn't find a thing. After that, I sat in the room for a while, though, just thinking about what the heck could that be? I've read about sleep hallucinations or the brain making sounds out of randomness or whatever, but I mean, I was awake and praying. I wasn't tired or groggy, and the sound was extremely distinct. It's the kind of thing that you don't mistake for anything else, really, too. Earlier today, though, I inspected the exterior near our bedroom window. There's no footprints, no signs of anybody outside, nothing. I also checked security footage from the front and the backyards, but there was nobody around. Here's the part that really freaked me out, though. So I went downstairs and asked my daughter if she had noticed anything strange lately. She hesitated and then quietly said, "Sometimes the lady in the closet cries at me. She shows me the lights and the shiny things. She doesn't like when I come back too soon, but then she lets me go." I asked her what she meant by all this, and she just sort of shrugged, smiling faintly like it was normal. She didn't seem afraid, I guess, but there was something in her tone that just didn't make sense. Almost like she was describing being somewhere else, somewhere not in our house or something. I really haven't slept well since then, too. Every time that I go near that closet, I feel watched now, even though there's no evidence of anything even there. My wife and I, we've both started leaving the closet door open, but even then sometimes I hear quiet creaks or soft cries when it's just me in the room. I'm planning to set up a camera inside the bedroom tonight, focused on that closet. I'm not sure what I'll find, but I need some kind of record because, well, this just doesn't seem to be going away, and I don't want my daughter to grow up thinking that this is normal. So, has anyone else ever experienced something like this? And if you have, then what did you do about it? Honestly, I just don't even know what to think anymore. So I grew up in southern Scotland, and there's a stretch of thick woodland just outside of the village that we used to call the Hollow. Me and a few friends had a little den in there when we were kids. Nothing fancy, just a few logs leaned together, some rope and a tarp, really. For years, too, weird stuff started showing up there. I'm not talking random objects, too. I mean, blankets, jackets, sleeping bags, stuff that didn't make sense. The first time that it happened was 2019 as well. I was about 14, and there were 2 old blankets laid over some scrap metal near a clump of birch trees, and being curious, or maybe stupid, I don't know, I lifted them, expecting maybe a marker for something buried. There was nothing. The ground looked completely normal, in fact. I shrugged it off, a bit weirded out, and I went back to climbing trees and messing around. A few weeks later, though, I noticed one blanket was gone, and 2 jackets had appeared now. I didn't see anyone, and the jackets weren't muddy or worn. They looked almost new, in fact. Weird, but I didn't stick around. For months, it stayed like that, too. Sometimes empty, sometimes with bottles or cans scattered around. We'd see the usual trash from people walking nearby, near the country road there, but the jackets and the blankets always seemed deliberately placed. Then, in spring of 2021, it got weirder. Me and a friend, Callum, we went back there and there was an old bike leaning against a tree. It wasn't a kid's bike, too. It was a decent adult bike, rusted a little bit, but in solid shape, I would say. A dark green jacket was draped over the handlebars, and I checked the pocket, and inside were 2 small mussel shells, way close to the coast here, some loose change, a couple of coins from Scotland and a few English pennies, a tiny scrap from a glue tube, it seemed, the kind that you get in DIY packs. On the back in pen was a series of numbers as well, lots of decimals, a time, 1540 I think it said, and the name of a small town in Cornwall. At the time I thought that it might be coordinates, but it didn't make sense. We never took photos, and eventually I lost that scrap years ago. After that, though, the place went quiet for a while. Then, in December of 2024, walking past, I found collapsed tents, sleeping bags, 3 jackets, and a couple of old blankets. It looked like somebody had set up camp and then maybe had left or something. I thought that I would investigate properly later, but I never did because it felt off, I guess. Fast forward to last week, though. I finally went back alone, and everything was gone. Literally nothing except one blue coat draped over a branch, a couple of empty beer bottles, and a pack of amber leaf rolling tobacco, empty. I didn't check the coat pockets this time. But here's what really freaks me out. If someone is living there, I should have seen them by now, surely. I mean, I've walked around that woodland at all hours since I was 10. No footprints, no tents, no fires, no signs of anyone. Just objects appearing and disappearing all over the place. And they seem to rotate as well. Like one day there's a jacket there, the next day it's somewhere else and blankets show up, vanish and come back somewhere new, and then the jackets are back again. It really just doesn't add up. Where are they getting these things from, and who are they? And why leave them out for us like this to see? There's no path that they're using. I mean, I've mapped the entire area now. 2-mile radius, checked every corner, and I cannot find any evidence of repeated visits or anybody else out there. It's almost like the objects just sort of, well, appear on their own. The thing is that sometimes I do catch glimpses of shadows at the edge of the trees there when I'm walking past. Not fully formed and just flashes, but nothing that I can really identify, and sometimes there's a sort of faint smell too, almost like rotten meat or something, right where a blanket or a jacket appears too. I don't know what it is. My friend stopped going a few years back saying that it was creepy, and honestly, I cannot argue with that. I've thought about staying late one night to try and see it, but the woods feel different after dark there. Silent in a way that's really sort of unnatural. Even sharing this now, I can feel my heart sort of picking up a bit. I've tried logic. I mean, someone collecting old clothes and moving them around, maybe, but why leave the mussel shells, the coin change, and the strange pen markings there? Why rotate the objects like a puzzle that, really, I'm the only one who's going to notice it? I don't have answers, and I've walked past that hollow dozens of times since I saw the blue coat, and I still check basically every week. Sometimes I swear that I see movement in the corner of my eye, but every time that I turn, there's nothing ever there. If anyone has an explanation for how this is possible, I would love to hear it. Again, I've been coming to this place for years now, almost every week, and I still have not seen a soul there. Or if you've seen something like this, stuff appearing and disappearing in the woods like this with no trace of anyone living there, well, it would at least be nice to know that I'm not losing it alone. Back in November of last year, I moved back in with my parents after ending a pretty bad relationship. I'm 23, and the breakup kind of forced me to restart things financially, so moving home made sense for a while at least. My parents' house, it's built on a slope, so the layout is a little bit weird, but what you'd normally call the second floor is actually where the front door is. The kitchen is there as well, the living room and the main bathroom. They're all there too because you have to walk up an outdoor staircase to get there. The lower level sits behind the house and it opens to the backyard, and that's where my room is. The backyard is fenced, but there's also a detached studio apartment back there that my parents rent out. Right now, there's a couple in their late 40s living there with their son, who's probably around 17 or 18. Since their place is in the back, everyone uses the side gate along the driveway to get in and out here as well. I usually use it too, especially if I'm coming home late because it's quieter than walking through the front and potentially waking my parents. As I said too, my room is on the lower floor, facing the backyard. One thing that's important too is my window situation. So, the blinds are those sort of older wooden ones. The bottom slat is broken too, so it's permanently angled open. If somebody stood outside in the yard, they could see straight into my room, in fact. I kept meaning to buy curtains, but I just kept putting it off. Also, my bed is sort of pushed right up against that window as well. Yeah, so not ideal, right? Anyway, About a week after I moved in, I started getting this weird feeling sometimes when I was laying in bed, like someone could see me through that window. It's hard to explain, and not like a noise or anything, but just that feeling that you get when somebody's looking at you. I mentioned it to my mother. She brushed it off, saying that the tenants probably walk through the yard sometimes, and I'm just not used to having people back there. That explanation, it made a lot of sense to me, so I stopped thinking about it. But then, around mid-February, something happened that got my attention again. I work at a restaurant downtown, and on Valentine's Day we were slammed. I ride a bike to work most days, and when my shift ended at around midnight, I went outside and noticed that my rear tire was completely flat, like totally dead. So instead of riding home, I had to walk the bike the whole way. It's about a 30-minute walk as well, mostly through quiet streets, and at one point I started getting that same weird feeling again, like somebody was behind me. I stopped a couple of times and looked around, but didn't see anyone. No footsteps either. Still though, I pulled out the little stun device that I carry just in case, and I kept walking. Eventually I got home and went through the side gate like usual. I unlocked the back door and I stepped inside. The second that the lights came on, though, was when I noticed that something was wrong. My bedroom door was open. Now, that might not sound like a big deal to you guys, but I always close it before leaving. We have a dog that will absolutely raid my room if the door is open, especially because I sometimes keep snacks in there. Learned that one the hard way once when he ate half a bag of chocolate. I know, really not good for dogs too. But the layout down there is pretty open, and when you enter through the back door, you're standing in this sort of big storage area with boxes and shelves everywhere. And from there, you can see the hallway where the rooms are. First room on the left is a small bathroom, and the second door is mine, then my dad's office and the stairs at the far end. So, from the moment that I walked in, I could clearly see my door standing open. I just sort of froze there for a second, staring at it. My first thought was that maybe my mum or dad came downstairs at some point for something and forgot to close it. But they almost never come down there unless they need something from storage, and are even less likely to go into my room of all places. Still though, I was exhausted from the trip home, and honestly I just didn't want to deal with it at the time. I checked my room quickly. Nothing looked out of place. My stuff was where I left it, and the window was still closed too. So I shut the door, changed clothes, and I went straight to bed. The next morning, I asked my parents if either of them had gone into my room the night before, and both said no. That same day too, I ran into the guy who lives in the guest unit when I was taking the trash out, and I asked him casually if he had seen anyone around the yard late at night before, and he said that he hadn't noticed anything unusual. I tried to just drop it after that, to be honest. But then, about 3 weeks ago, something else happened. It was one of my days off, and I spent most of the day in bed watching movies on my laptop. At some point, it got dark outside, and I didn't even notice until my mum came downstairs asking if I could lower the volume because she and my dad were trying to sleep upstairs. So I turned it down and kept watching. But around midnight, I heard a quick tapping sound on the window. Just a couple of taps, and I looked over but didn't see anything clearly. For a split second, though, I thought that I saw something move away, but it was so fast that I figured that maybe it was just a branch or maybe a raccoon or something. So again, I just sort of shrugged it off. Later that night, though, probably at around 1:30 in the morning, I started feeling that same being watched thing again. It sounds dumb, I know, but it's the only way that I can really describe it. I kept glancing over to the window, but it was too dark to see anything. Eventually, I shut the laptop off and I went to sleep. But a few hours later, I woke up to a faint tapping noise again. I was half asleep at first, and I thought that it was my dog scratching at the door. But then I rolled over and looked toward the window, and I could clearly see the outline of a person standing outside, just a dark shape through the blinds. Whoever it was close enough too that I could see their arm moving as they tapped the glass. Slow, steady taps. I didn't move at first. My whole body just sort of locked up, in fact. I stayed like that watching for what felt like forever. Realistically, it was probably 10 minutes or so, maybe a little more, but the person didn't try to break the window or say anything. Just stood there and tapped occasionally. Then, suddenly, they stepped away and disappeared out of view. The second that I was sure that they were gone, I grabbed whatever that I could reach, my phone charger, pillow, the dog, and I just ran upstairs. I slept on the couch that night, and honestly, I haven't gone back to sleeping in my room since then. And during the day, everything looks normal outside too. No footprints, no damage, nothing moved. The tenants say that they haven't seen anyone back there either, and my parents think that it was probably some random guy who jumped the fence or someone messing around, but that explanation just doesn't really sit right with me because, the yard is pretty enclosed and you'd have to know the layout to even get to my window in the dark. For now, I just sleep upstairs in the living room, and I also ordered blackout curtains and a small camera for the backyard as well. And look, maybe it really was just a creep passing through, but the thing that keeps bothering me is this. Whoever was outside that night was standing exactly where they would need to be to see my bed through that broken blind, which means they either got very lucky or they knew exactly where to stand. Also, the timing of the flat tire on my bike, well, that is really weirdly coincidental. When I was about 17, around 2003 or 2004, things at home were pretty tense most of the time. My stepdad and I didn't really get along, and arguments would blow up over stupid stuff, really. If things got heated enough to, I'd either get told to leave for the night, or I'd just grab my jacket and walk out before it escalated. It happened often enough too that wandering around late at night became pretty normal for me. This was in a small coastal town too, and not a big city or anything. Most nights after midnight, the streets were completely dead. I'd usually just sort of walk loops through the same few neighborhoods until I cooled off or got tired enough to head back. One night, I remember pretty clearly because it was cold and quiet in that weird way where you can hear your own footsteps echo a bit. It must have been around 1:30 or 2 in the morning. I was walking uphill toward the street after being out for a couple of hours. There were no other people around, no houses with lights on, nothing. And about halfway up the hill, I heard a car coming from behind me. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Cars pass now and then on the street, even late. But this one slowed, and it got really close to me. It pulled up beside me and just kind of idled there, matching my walking speed. I glanced over for a second. The driver was this heavy-set guy, probably in his 40s or 50s. Big round face, short dark hair, thick neck. His expression was weirdly blank, but his eyes were fixed on me in a way that immediately made me feel really uncomfortable. He leaned slightly toward the open window and said something like, "Hey, come here a sec." Not aggressive exactly, but not friendly either, just very direct. Back then it wasn't all that rare for grown men to shout weird stuff at teenage girls walking alone. It happened enough that I usually just told them to get lost and keep going. But something about this guy made my stomach drop instantly. I can't explain it properly, but it was just that gut sort of reaction where you suddenly feel like you need to get away. So instead of saying anything, I just sort of looked straight ahead and kept walking faster like I didn't hear him. The car rolled ahead of me a few meters and stopped. Now he was parked slightly in front of me on the road. As I got closer, he turned his head and watched me past the driver's door. Again, he said something, this time louder. I don't remember the exact words, but it was something like, "Hey, I'm talking to you." I didn't even look at him that time. I just kept walking and focused on the end of the street where my house was, about 2 blocks away now. Then the engine revved, and he sped off. For a second I thought that was the end of it too, but maybe 15 seconds later, I heard the same engine coming back. I turned my head and saw the car making a fast U-turn down the street. It pulled up next to me, but this time he braked harder and stopped closer. I was standing right next to the driver's window now, and I stepped backward and crossed the road quickly without saying anything. At this point, my house was visible up the hill, and I remember thinking very clearly that I needed to get there before he tried anything else. But the car accelerated past me again, went further up the road, then turned around a second time. This one was way more aggressive too. You could hear the tires scrape a bit, and then he swung the car around. He pulled up about 5 meters ahead of me, and this time he flung the driver's door open before the car had even completely stopped. That was the moment that I panicked too. Instead of heading straight for my place, I cut across the street and ran into my neighbor's driveway because it was closer. The yard had these tall hedges along the side that made a narrow path between the house and the fence. I sprinted down that gap and ducked around the back corner toward our side door. Our place had a sort of small recessed doorway that was kind of hidden from the street if the lights were off. My hands were shaking badly while I tried to get my key in the lock, and while I was fumbling around, I heard the car slowly sort of crawl into the driveway. He was now in the entrance behind me. I froze and crouched into the doorway as much as I could. From where I was standing, I could see part of the driveway through the hedge. The car had stopped near the top. The driver got out and walked a few steps down the driveway too, looking around like he was trying to see where I'd gone. He didn't rush, and that is something that I remember very clearly. He just moved slowly, scanning the yard and the bushes. For a second, I was convinced that he had seen me too, because I could hear gravel crunching under his shoes as he came a little bit closer. But the alcove that I was standing in, it was completely pitch dark. The porch light had been broken for months, so the whole side of that house was basically pitch black. He stood there for maybe 10 seconds. I noticed something in his hand, but I couldn't quite make out what it was. Then he turned around, walked back to the car, and thankfully drove away. I stayed in that doorway for another minute, just listening in case he came back. When I finally got inside, my brother was still awake watching TV, and I told him what happened. He sort of laughed it off at the time, saying that the guy was probably just drunk or something. We were both teenagers, so it didn't really sink in just how weird that situation was until later. After that night, though, I tried to avoid walking around that late by myself, but life moved on, and eventually I stopped thinking about it. Then, about 5 or 6 years later, I was watching the news and they showed a mugshot of a man who had just been arrested for a string of attacks on women across several towns in the region. I mean, kidnappings, assaults, a couple of murders that had gone unsolved for years, apparently. The camera stayed on his photo for a while, and I suddenly felt this weird jolt of, recognition. It was the same heavy round face, same dark eyes that looked kind of empty. The report said that he'd been operating through the early 2000s, mostly targeting women walking alone late at night. Several incidences had happened within a 20 to 30 mile radius of where I grew up, in fact. Now, I am not saying that it was definitely the same guy. I mean, I cannot prove that, but man, the timing, the area, and the way that he behaved that night, it all lined up way too neatly. Back when it happened too, I shrugged it off pretty quickly. I was young and figured that weird stuff just happened sometimes. Now I'm in my 30s with kids of my own, and when I think about that night, it bothers me so much more than it used to. Mostly because I keep replaying how easily things could have gone differently if my house had been just even 1 block further away, or if that side door light had been working. Anyway, that's why I get nervous when I see teenagers wandering around alone at night now, and at the time it just felt like some creepy guy being annoying, but looking back, I'm not sure that that's all that it really was. I've had a few weird things happen over the years that I still cannot really explain. None of them sound crazy on their own, but when I think back on them, they still make me uneasy. I'll just lay them out how they happened here so you guys can follow along. So the first one was around 2011 when my husband got locked up for DUI for a few weeks. At the time, I was living alone in this tiny rental in a small town. The place was barely bigger than a studio. The front door opened into a combined living room and kitchen area, and there was a short sort of hallway that led to the bedroom and the bathroom. From my bed, I could see straight out into the kitchen if the bedroom door was open as well. I usually left the door open because the place felt less claustrophobic that way. One night, I stayed up late watching TV and was messing around on my laptop. I remember checking the microwave clock before going to bed, and it said something like 2:45 in the morning. I shut everything off, fed the cats, and I eventually went to bed. I had 3 cats at the time, in fact, one older female and 2 younger ones that followed her around constantly. I must have been drifting in and out of sleep too when something woke me suddenly. I didn't know what it was at first. I was sort of just lying there half awake trying to figure out why I was so alert suddenly. But then I heard it. It sounded like a woman screaming from the kitchen. Not yelling words, but just a loud, sharp scream like someone had gotten hurt or was surprised or something. It only lasted maybe a second or two, but before I could even sit up, all 3 cats bolted into the bedroom at full speed. Their claws were sliding on the floor like they couldn't get traction, and they jumped onto the bed immediately. What freaked me out too was how they positioned themselves. The 2 younger ones pressed themselves tight against my sides like they were trying to hide against me, and the older one sort of climbed right onto my back. All 3 of them were stiff though, ears pinned down, eyes wide open. They stayed like that too for at least half an hour. They didn't move when I tried to shift them around, and normally if I moved even a little bit, they'd jump off the bed, but that night they stayed locked in place all night. I kept listening for something else in the house, but I never heard anything else. At one point I grabbed my phone and I turned the flashlight on and I pointed it toward the kitchen area, but nothing was out of place. The back door was still locked. The cats didn't relax though until it started getting light outside. The weird thing is that animals usually calm down after a minute or two if they get startled like that. But that night they stayed tense until sunrise, like they were waiting for something. I never figured out what that scream was. And a couple of years later, something else happened that bothered me for a completely different reason. I was staying with my family in a small property just outside of Tucson. My brother had a place there, and my nephew was about 3 at the time, I think. The houses on the property, they were arranged kind of weird there, and my brother's family lived in the main house, and I was staying in a small converted garage at the back. And one morning, I got up early and went to shower before everybody else woke up. I had just turned the water on when I clearly heard my nephew yelling my name from outside. Not just talking, but yelling like kids do when they want your attention. I heard him call me twice, in fact. So I shut the water off, grabbed a towel, and I ran outside, thinking that maybe he had gotten into something or hurt himself. But the yard? It was empty. My brother was standing in the doorway of the main house drinking coffee, and I asked where my nephew was. He looked confused and said that the kid was still asleep inside. Then he asked me if I had just heard him yelling, because apparently he had heard it too. We both went inside and checked, and sure enough, my nephew was passed out in his bed. That one always bothered me more as well because, well, 2 of us heard the exact same thing. A while after that, my husband and I were renting a different place with a roommate in Spokane. This one happened super early in the morning, maybe around 4:30 or so. So, the 3 of us were awake because my husband woke early for a shift, and we were all sitting near the kitchen window smoking before he left. I was leaning back in the chair facing the window when something moved past the side of my head. At first I thought it was smoke blowing weirdly from the cigarette, but it moved way too quickly. And it looked like a pale grey shape, I would say. Kind of like a head and shoulders, or the outline of it, really. but it was sort of see-through. It passed right between me and the wall, and then it was gone. I turned around immediately, and our roommate was staring straight at me with this sort of shocked look. She asked me, "Did you see that?" Which was not what I wanted to hear, to be honest, because that meant that it wasn't my eyes playing tricks on me. None of us really said much after that, though. My husband just sort of put his cigarette out and, well, he left for work. The last weird stuff happened years earlier when I was about 14. So my mum took me on a bus trip to visit some family in Cleveland because my grandmother was really sick at the time. We stayed at my aunt's house while we were there, and their house had a finished basement where my cousin's bedroom was. She was letting me use her room while I visited, and she asked if I could braid her hair in the morning before school. That night, I went down there to sleep, and sometime early in the morning, I sort of half woke up and heard the basement door at the top of the stairs open and close. Then I heard someone walking down the stairs slowly. They stopped outside of the bedroom door, and there was a quiet knock, then footsteps going back up the stairs. I assumed it was my cousin getting up for school, so I got out of bed and went upstairs. But when I did, everybody was still asleep. The lights were all off, and the house was completely quiet. I went back downstairs thinking that maybe I had dreamt it or something. After I laid back down, though, I heard the same thing again. The basement door opened this time too, and there were steps on the stairs. This time the bedroom doorknob started moving as well, like somebody was trying to turn it over and over again. Then it stopped, and the footsteps went back up the stairs again. Well, that was enough for me. I went upstairs and woke my uncle up and told him that I wasn't staying in that room anymore. He thought that I was just being dramatic, but he grabbed my bag for me anyway. I slept on the couch for the rest of the trip, and the weird part about that house is something strange happened there again years later. My brother stayed there when we went back for a cousin's wedding at one point, and he was sleeping in a spare room toward the back of the house. Nobody ever got the full story out of him, but apparently something happened during that night because the next morning he was sitting upright in bed holding a pillow and refused to stay there another night and just left. I mean, he literally packed up and went to stay with another relative instead. He was that spooked by whatever happened. He still won't explain what happened to this day as well. A few months after that, there was an electrical fire that started in the same back room. It spread fast enough that most of the house had to be rebuilt, in fact. I'm not saying that any of these things are really connected in any way. I mean, they probably are not, but old houses make noises and people hear things wrong. Brains do weird stuff when you're half asleep, right? But those moments, they always stuck with me because each time somebody else was there who heard or saw the same thing. And really, that's the part that I find the hardest to explain. I lived in a really strange house for about a year when I was in my early 20s, around 2014 or so. It was an older neighborhood on the edge of Nottingham. My parents had bought the place cheap because it needed a lot of work, and the plan was to renovate it and sell it later. At the time I was still living with them, so I ended up staying there during most of the renovation. From the outside, the place just looked like a normal older terrace house, I guess. Inside, it was a bit odd, though. There was this partial upper level built into the main room, kind of like a mezzanine platform that overlooked the living area. The previous owners had turned that space into a small bedroom and a cramped bathroom, too. The bathroom up there was absolutely tiny as well. There was no window and just one weak ceiling light, and old plumbing that made noise all the time. It was the kind of room where you didn't want to stay longer than necessary because it felt really closed in. Now, not long after we started tearing parts of the house apart, weird things started happening. At first, it was small stuff. Like, I'd be downstairs watching TV, for instance, and I would see something move quickly along the mezzanine railing out of the corner of my eye. When I'd look directly at it, there was nothing there, though. It happened often enough that I stopped mentioning it because I figured that it was just my eyes adjusting to shadows or something like that. My mother had the opposite reaction, though. She thought that the whole thing was really interesting. If something odd happened, she'd literally talk into the room like somebody was there as well. She would say stuff like, "We're just fixing the place up," or "Don't worry about it." I always thought that that was a terrible idea, but she found it funny for some reason. Two things happened there that I still remember clearly too. The first one happened while I was using the upstairs bathroom. So one night I decided to take a bath because the shower downstairs had been ripped out during the renovation. It was probably around, 9 or 10 o'clock in the evening. My parents were somewhere else in the house working on drywall, I think, and while I was sitting there, I started hearing a tapping noise inside of the wall near the sink. At first, it sounded like normal construction noise, so I ignored it. My dad had tools running half the time anyway, so it was probably just one of them. But after a few minutes, it didn't stop. It actually got more regular, like someone tapping their fingers on wood. I sort of sat up thinking that my dad might be drilling or hammering on the other side of the wall or something. That's when I noticed the toilet paper roll. It was spinning on its own. At first I thought that maybe the loose end had fallen and gravity was pulling it down, but that's not what it looked like. The roll was turning fast, like somebody was pulling the paper straight outward. The strip of paper was sticking straight out from the wall, almost perfectly horizontal. It kept unwinding faster and faster as well. There were no windows open, no vent blowing air, nothing that really could have caused it. I stared at it for a few seconds, trying to make sense of it, and then the roll spun so quickly that the paper started piling onto the floor. That was enough for me. I got out of the tub immediately, wrapped a towel around myself, and I walked straight out of that bathroom. I didn't even stop to turn the light off in the end. But when I told my mother about it, she laughed and said something like, maybe it doesn't like the renovations. Not exactly comforting, right? The second thing happened months later, after my bedroom had been moved downstairs, while we were remodeling the mezzanine area. So my new room was at the front of the house facing the street. It had these big built-in wardrobes along one wall that previous owners had installed there. The doors were old wood panels that creaked whenever the house shifted. I also had this tall metal floor lamp next to my bed that I bought from IKEA. It had a thin metal pole and a heavy base, and a lot of little things happened in that room over time. My phone would randomly light up in the middle of the night, even when there was no notifications. A couple of books on my desk would be open in the morning, even though I knew that I left them closed. Once, my old MP3 player started playing music while it was sitting on the shelf. Stuff like this is easy enough to explain away though, right? I mean, electronics glitch, houses shift, whatever. But one night, something happened that I couldn't really brush off anymore. It was late, probably after midnight, and I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep. Then I heard tapping. At first it sounded like it was coming from the wardrobe doors across the room, just a light knock every few seconds. I ignored it, thinking that maybe the wood was expanding or whatever. Then the tapping moved, and it sounded closer. A few seconds later, too, it came from the metal lamp beside my bed. A very clear ting sound, like someone lightly hitting the pole with a fingernail. Then it happened again and again. I sat up in bed listening. The room was completely still, but the tapping kept happening on that lamp. Then it shifted again, this time to the wooden headboard behind me. 3 slow knocks right behind my head. At that point, I was wide awake. And before I could even stand up, the bed frame started shaking. Not a little vibration either. The whole thing moved, like somebody had grabbed the end of the mattress and shoved it sideways. As you can probably imagine, I didn't stay there to investigate any further. I jumped out of bed and went straight for the door. My plan was to just sleep on the couch downstairs in the end. Our dog was old at the time and couldn't climb the stairs anymore, so he usually slept in the living room anyway. so I figured that I would just stay near him. When I got to the bottom of the staircase, there was something that I noticed that stopped me for a second, though. Right near the base of the railing, there was what I can only describe as like a dark shape that didn't look like a normal shadow. It was taller than me, maybe around 2 meters, I would say, and it looked like a thick cloud of smoke just sitting there, not moving or anything, but more like slowly swirling in place, I would say. The hallway light behind it was on, but the shape was blocking part of that light in a way that really didn't make much sense to me. I stared at it for maybe 2 seconds, and then I decided that I didn't want to be in that house anymore that night, and so I grabbed my keys, went outside, and I slept in my car parked down the street. The next morning, everything in the house looked normal again, though. My parents stayed there for another few months until the renovations were finished. Nothing that extreme ever happened to me again, but I also stopped sleeping in that room after that. Eventually, they sold the place and we moved on. I still don't know what half of that stuff was. I mean, old houses do weird things, and your brain can mess with you when you're tired, for sure. And some of that stuff, I'm sure, can be explained away as just glitches or whatever. But I know what I saw with that toilet roll, and I know that the bed didn't shake by itself. I also know that I saw that black, dark mass, and I also definitely remember choosing to sleep in a freezing car instead of going back inside that house. This happened when I was around 13, so sometime around 2007. My family had moved away from the Midwest a few years earlier, but we still went back every now and then to visit people that we knew. On one of those trips, we stayed a few nights in an older hotel. It wasn't some abandoned creepy place or anything like that, just one of those older brick hotels that probably had been around since like the 60s or the 70s. We booked 2 rooms because there were 5 of us. My parents stayed in one and my older brother and I were in the other. And the first thing that I remember about that room was that it made me uncomfortable the second that I walked in there. Nothing obvious was wrong. The lights worked, the place looked clean enough, beds were normal hotel beds. But for whatever reason, I just didn't like being in there. I didn't say anything because I was a kid and I assumed I was being weird about staying somewhere unfamiliar, but the layout of the room was kind of awkward too. When you opened the main door from the hallway, you immediately faced a corner of the room, for instance. On the left side of that corner was the bathroom door, and on the right side was the door leading back out to the hallway. The beds were further inside of the room as well, near the windows, which was a bit strange, but if you were standing near the entrance, you were basically between these 2 doors. The first night that I slept there, I had a really intense nightmare too. In the dream, I was lying in the exact position that I had fallen asleep in, facing the wall, and in the dream I knew something was behind me in the room. I couldn't see it, but I knew that it was moving slowly toward the bed. I also had this weird sense that if it reached me, that I wouldn't wake up again. Then I woke up suddenly. My heart was racing and I was sweating, and my brother was asleep in the other bed, and the room looked normal to me. I figured that it was just a bad dream from being somewhere new in the end. The next day I spent most of the time out with friends who still lived in that area. I didn't think about the room much until later that night, in fact. But when I got back to the hotel, my parents told me that my brother was going to stay with one of his friends for the rest of the week. And that meant that I was going to be alone in that room now. As soon as I stepped back inside of that room, that uneasy feeling hit me again too, but it was way stronger this time. It's hard to explain, but it was like my brain was telling me that something was off, even though everything looked normal. I tried to avoid going back to the room for as long as possible that night. I hung out in my parents' room watching TV until they told me that I needed to go and get some sleep. That night, I had that same dream again too. Same position in bed, same feeling that something was coming toward me from the other side of the room. Except this time, in the dream, it felt way closer than before. What made the dream extra strange, too, is that I could clearly see the wall in front of me, like the room lights were on, even though I knew that I was asleep. At some point, I woke up again and realized that I was in the exact same position as the dream, facing the wall lying on my side. I sat up quickly and turned around toward the rest of the room. The lights were off, but I could see the outlines of the furniture from the light coming through the curtains, and nothing was there. Still, though, I had that strong feeling that someone had just been standing near the bed watching me. Eventually, I managed to fall asleep again, but I woke up exhausted the next morning. The third day went the same way, too. I was out with friends most of the day and tried not to think about the room at all, and that night the dream happened again. This time the thing in the dream felt like it was right behind me, too. I woke up with that really strong feeling that somebody was standing over the bed again, and for a few seconds I just couldn't move at all, which was really weird. I just stared at the wall in front of me, trying to get the nerve to roll over. When I finally did turn around, the room looked darker than the previous nights. The city lights from outside usually lit the room a little bit, but this time it looked almost completely black. That was the moment that I decided that I was going to ask my parents if I could just sleep on the extra bed in their room for the rest of the trip. The next day, too, something happened that made things way worse. So I had been visiting a friend's house during the afternoon, and I decided that I wanted to bring over a video game that I had left in the hotel room. It was an old Xbox game that I thought that he'd want to try, and so I went back to the hotel by myself to grab it. It was the middle of the day, bright outside, normal activity in the hallways, nothing strange. But the second that I unlocked that door, the room door, and stepped inside, that same uncomfortable feeling came back instantly. And I mean, it went from 0 to full panic mode in about 2 seconds this time. I started looking around the room for the game case, but I just couldn't find it anywhere. I checked the desk, the bed, under the TV, and then I heard a noise come from behind me. It sounded like the bathroom door slowly moving. I turned around immediately and saw that the door had opened a few inches now. I thought that maybe it hadn't latched when I left earlier. Old hotel doors can do that sometimes. The problem was that my bag was sitting on the floor right next to the bathroom door, so if the game was anywhere, it was probably going to be in there. I walked over and started digging through that bag, and the second that I looked down, I heard that door move again, another slow creak. I snapped my head up and saw the bathroom door had opened a little bit more now. It was about a quarter of the way open now, I would say. I sort of stared at it for a while, waiting to see if it moved again, but it stayed still this time. At that point, I was trying to convince myself that it was just a loose hinge or maybe air pressure or something like that. So I looked back down at the bag, and almost immediately, the door creaked again. This time when I looked up, it was open about halfway as well, and from where I was standing, I could see part of the inside of the bathroom now, but it looked really oddly dark in there. Darker than it should have been, considering the curtains in the main room were open and letting in daylight. Well, at that point, I didn't care about the game anymore. The problem was, though, is that leaving that room, I had to walk right past the bathroom doorway because the way the entrance was set up. I stood there for a second, trying to decide what to do. Then I started moving slowly toward the exit, while keeping my eyes on the bathroom door. I must have made it maybe one step before my brain basically decided that I was done being brave. I ran the last few steps to the room door and I yanked it open. And right as I stepped into the hallway, I heard the bathroom door slam all the way open behind me. It hit the wall hard enough to make a loud bang even. For a split second, I glanced toward the doorway while I was leaving, and all I saw inside of that bathroom now was complete darkness, like the light from the room didn't even exist anymore in there. I didn't stick around to figure out what was going on, though. I went straight to my parents' room and told them that I left my key in my room and I needed them to come with me to grab it. When we went back together and opened the door, everything looked normal, though. The bathroom door was completely closed, not halfway open, not open at all, in fact. Closed tight like it had been shut the whole time. I grabbed my stuff and I told my parents that I wanted to stay with my friend for the rest of the trip, and that was pretty much the end of it. Looking back now as an adult, I can think of possible explanations for some of the things that happened. I mean, old doors move on their own, lighting can play tricks on you, and being tired can make your brain jump to conclusions, but I still remember how that door only moved whenever I looked away from it. I will never forget the darkness in that room, just how completely dark it actually was. And I also remember hearing it slam open the exact moment that I ran out of that room. This happened a few years ago, around 2021. I've told pieces of it before, but never the full version. And out of all the weird stuff that I've had happen in my life, this one is the one that still makes me uncomfortable even thinking about it. A quick bit of context first, though. I'm not someone who thinks every strange noise is a ghost or whatever, but I do get this really strong gut feeling sometimes when something is off. I don't mean seeing spirits or anything dramatic like that, just this sudden feeling like you're not alone or that something is wrong. My mum is the complete opposite, though. She thinks every paranormal story has a normal explanation for it. Anyway, my mum and my aunt and my younger cousin and we took a trip in late summer in 2021. We rented a small vacation house for about 5 days. The main plan was to spend most of the time going to the parks, so the rental was just supposed to be a place to sleep. The house itself wasn't big. When you walked in the front door, there was a kitchen directly ahead, and to the right was a short hallway that had the bathroom and 2 small bedrooms. One of those was mine, and the other was my mum's. On the left side of the house, there was a living room and another bedroom where my aunt and cousin were staying. Pretty normal layout, really. Nothing that really stood out. So the first day was completely uneventful, to be honest. We got there late afternoon, unpacked, ordered some food, watched TV for a bit, then everyone went to bed. No weird feelings and nothing strange. The second night is when the first thing happened. So I was still awake at around 11 p.m. scrolling through my phone. The house was quiet, so I assumed everyone else had already gone to sleep, and my bedroom door was closed, but the wall behind my bed connected to the kitchen area. After a while, I started hearing the microwave keypad being pressed. Not the microwave actually running, but just the buttons making the little sort of electronic beep sound over and over again. It happened a few times too in a row. I figured that my cousin had gotten up to eat something. She was always snacking late at night. But the microwave never actually started, just the random button sounds. After a minute or two it stopped, and I went to sleep thinking nothing of it really. The next morning, while we were driving to one of the parks, I sort of casually asked who was messing with the microwave late the night before, and everyone said that it wasn't them. My cousin actually said that she heard the same beeping through the wall and assumed that I was the one out in the kitchen. We joked about it for a minute and then we moved on. That night, though, things got stranger. So we got back from the park exhausted and everyone went to bed early that night. I was again the last person awake, probably around 10 or 10:30. And not long after I turned the lights off, I started hearing knocking behind my bed. At first it sounded faint, just a tap every once in a while. I assumed it was someone in the neighboring rental unit, or maybe pipes in the wall or whatever. But after about 10 minutes, it got louder and more regular, almost like somebody was tapping their knuckles on drywall. I turned my lamp on and the knocking stopped immediately, and when I turned the light back off, it started again. That alone was pretty annoying, but not terrifying. But what actually scared me happened about an hour later. So, I was lying there staring at the doorway because I couldn't fall asleep that night. The hallway light outside of my room was on, so I could see part of the doorway. And then I saw what looked like a small white ball of light moving slowly into the room. It came from the hallway area, and it floated about halfway across the room before quickly disappearing back toward the door. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, I would say, but I sat up instantly because I thought it might have been a reflection from a car outside or something. But the window in that room faced the backyard, and there were no cars back there as far as I knew. At that point, I turned the lights back on, and I left them on that night. For the next couple of hours, I kept hearing the same things too. Knocking on the wall behind the bed, then from the bathroom wall, and occasionally those microwave buttons beeping again from the kitchen. This went on until around 2 in the morning as well, before everything finally stopped and I managed to get a little bit of sleep. The next day, I told everyone what happened, and nobody took it seriously. My mum especially thought that I was exaggerating because I'd already told them about the microwave thing the night before. I dropped it in the end and I went out again for the day. But here's where things really escalated. So on the 4th day, my aunt and my cousin left early for a volleyball tournament, about an hour away. They planned to stay overnight near the venue, so it was just going to be me and my mum at the house that evening. Around 8 p.m, we were both sitting in her room watching TV when I heard the knocking again, same exact spot behind my bed down the hallway. I didn't even say anything at first because I figured that she would just brush it off again. But after a minute, she looked at me and said, "Do you hear that?" Then it moved. The tapping started coming from the bathroom wall instead, then from somewhere in the living room area. Not super loud, but definitely noticeable. We both got up and checked around the house thinking that maybe someone was outside or something was hitting the walls or something, but there was nothing that we could find. Then we heard something fall in the other bedroom across the house, a loud plastic clatter. It sounded like a bottle getting knocked off of a table. We went to check and found a water bottle on the floor near the bed. It had been sitting upright on the dresser earlier, though. At that point, my mum started taking it a bit more seriously, and while we were standing there, the knocking started again, but this time it was coming from multiple spots around the house. Walls, kitchen area, hallway. Not constant banging or anything dramatic, but just taps from different directions. But it definitely kept happening, and we were both hearing it. The atmosphere in the house started feeling really uncomfortable all of a sudden too. Hard to explain, but both of us definitely felt it. We decided then that we were done staying there for the night. So we started packing up our bags to go to get a new hotel, and while I was carrying my duffel bag down the hallway toward the living room, I heard footsteps directly behind me, heavy ones, like someone walking right on my heels. I turned around immediately, but my mum was still in her room on the other side of the hallway, and no one was there. That was the moment that I just said out loud something like, "All right, we're leaving." And the weirdest part of the whole situation happened right then. Everything stopped. No more knocking, no more sounds. The weird tension in the house just disappeared all of a sudden. We still left anyway and stayed the night at a hotel nearby because, well, we were too freaked out to stay any longer. The next day, we went back to grab the rest of our stuff before our flight home, and the house was completely normal again. Nothing moved, no sounds, nothing weird. I have thought about this over the years too and tried to come up with any sort of explanation for it, but I just have really struggled to. I do know that both my mum and I heard those knocks coming from different parts of the house, and the timing of everything suddenly stopping the moment that we said that we were leaving, that's the part that still sticks with me the most. This happened when I was in my early 20s while I was studying nursing. I think it was around 2016 or maybe 2017. The university had student housing, specifically for nursing and midwifery students. It was located right on the grounds of the hospital where we did a lot of our training. The hospital, it was in Manchester, and the accommodation block sat on the far end of the property, behind a couple of older buildings. It was basically a cheap dorm setup for healthcare students, really. Long hallways, shared kitchen, and a bunch of small private rooms. One of the things that people always mentioned when they first moved in was that the morgue building was only a short walk away behind the pathology wing. Most people joked about it, but it did make the place feel a bit weird late at night when you were walking back from a shift. When I first moved in, I figured that the uneasy feeling that I had was just nerves. It was the first time that I'd lived away from home after all, and the building was older and kind of run down too. Pipes made noises, the floor creaked a lot, stuff like that. But after a few weeks, I started noticing things that didn't quite add up. At first it was small things, like I'd leave something on my desk, go to the shared kitchen, come back, and it would be somewhere else in the room. Nothing dramatic, but more like things like my phone being on the opposite side of the desk, or maybe a notebook moved onto the bed. I assumed I was just forgetting where I put things at first. But then the nightmares began. They weren't normal bad dreams either. It was always the same basic theme. I'd be asleep in my room, but in the dream I knew something else was in there with me. I wouldn't see it clearly, but I knew that it was standing somewhere behind me. The dreams were intense enough that I'd wake up with my heart racing like I'd just run somewhere. Around the same time, too, I started getting this weird sense that something bad was about to happen occasionally. Not all the time, but just sort of random moments where I'd suddenly feel on edge. One afternoon, too, I had that exact feeling while I was walking through the hallway to the kitchen. I remember thinking that it was stupid because, well, nothing was actually happening. But about 5 seconds later, the heavy fire door at the end of the hall slammed shut right as I was reaching for it and caught two of my fingers. It was nothing serious in the end, but man, it hurt enough to make me drop what I was carrying. Stuff like that happened a few times too, where I'd get that weird gut feeling and then something would go wrong shortly afterward. During my second term, I ended up taking in a hamster from another student who couldn't keep it anymore. She was moving out and basically said that if someone didn't take it, that she was going to leave it behind. So I kept the hamster in a glass tank in my room. The hamster was pretty active at night and would run around the tank and chew on things. It was pretty normal, really. One night, though, I woke up to a sound coming from the cage that didn't match anything that I'd heard before. It sounded like a low growl. I know that that sounds absolutely ridiculous because hamsters don't really make noises like that, at least not that I've ever heard. But that's what it sounded like, a low, irritated growling noise. The hamster was standing still in the corner of the cage, staring toward the door of my room while making that sound. It did it for maybe 10 seconds before stopping. After that, it went back to running on the wheel like nothing had happened. Another thing that happened fairly often involved the shared kitchen. So sometimes when I knew that I was alone in the apartment, I'd hear what sounded like somebody using dishes out there, the sound of cupboards opening or plates moving around. The first couple of times I checked because, well, I assumed one of my flatmates had come home quietly. But every time, the kitchen was empty. The weirdest issue, though, involved the oven. This happened multiple times over a few months, in fact. So, I'd put something in to cook and set the temperature to something like 180 degrees Celsius. Then 10 minutes later, I noticed the oven was blasting at maximum heat. At first, I assumed that I must have accidentally turned the dial too far. But then two of the girls that I shared the place with mentioned the exact same problem. They thought that I was messing with the settings as some kind of a prank, in fact. The problem with that theory is that it happened to me as well when I was alone in the apartment and they weren't even home. So, unless the oven dial was broken, none of us really knew why it kept happening. The general feeling in that building also got worse over time. Whenever I went back home during breaks and then came back to the dorm, the moment that I unlocked my room, I'd get this immediate sense of tension, like walking back into a place where you knew that something just wasn't right. One of the nurses supervising my ICU placement ended up knowing about the building too, and one night during a break I mentioned the dorms to her and asked if she knew anything about them. She immediately said yes, and told me that she actually lived there years earlier when the hospital used to let staff rent the rooms there. Then, she told me something really interesting. She said that she once complained to the housing office because she kept hearing someone running through the flat above hers late at night. Heavy footsteps, back and forth for long stretches, and she couldn't get any sleep. When she reported it, they told her, though, that apparently nobody was living in the room above her. She also said that once when a friend was visiting, they both noticed what looked like somebody standing near the kitchen doorway out of the corner of their eyes, and they turned and looked, but there was nothing there. The story, it didn't really help my nerves at all, and the worst experience that I had there, that happened near the end of my stay there. So I had fallen asleep after a long shift, and I had a really disturbing dream. In the dream, there was an elderly woman standing at the foot of my bed, wearing a hospital gown. Her face looked wrong somehow, and she was laughing in a way that felt sort of aggressive rather than normal. In the dream, she said that she was going to take something from me. Then I woke up immediately. Except I couldn't move. It was like full sleep paralysis. I was awake but completely stuck, and I could see my room clearly, but my body just wouldn't respond. That feeling lasted maybe 20 seconds, but it felt way longer than that. After that night, I started leaving the bedside lamp on when I slept. The strange thing is that I had originally planned to move out earlier that year, but I ended up failing one module and had to stay in the dorms longer than I expected. And for months, I kept having this weird thought that I was somehow stuck there and would never get out of the place. But thankfully, eventually I did finish the course requirements and I moved out a few months later. When I talked about that place with other nursing students after leaving, quite a few of them admitted that they didn't like staying there either. Several said that they felt uneasy in the building but could never explain why. And I still clearly remember that hamster staring at that door and making that weird sound that night. So strange. And I definitely remember how relieved I felt the day that I finally moved out of that place. This one is long, but stick with me because it all connects. It's probably the strangest, most intense thing that I've ever experienced in the bush, and it still messes with my head a bit. It happened around 2021, near a small stretch of the Mary River in Gympie, Queensland. Not exactly a famous spot or anything, just a little swimming hole that locals sometimes use. I was on my own that weekend because a music festival that I'd planned to go to got cancelled last minute. I had my little van packed for the trip, and so I figured, well, why not just camp nearby for a night? The area that I picked was a small clearing near a bend in the river. There was a tiny waterfall, maybe 3 feet high, and a little sandy area there too. It was not crowded at all by any means. I got there around 8:30, set up my van, had a few beers, and just chilled. The night was calm, frogs, insects, the river flowing. I even took some time to watch the water for a little while. I slept all right and woke at around 6:30 in the morning to sunlight hitting the van. And that's when I noticed how trashed the spot was. Broken bottles, cans, plastic everywhere. People were absolute pigs. I had some trash bags in the back of my van from my work, so I decided to clean it up. It took me almost 2 hours, moving through the sticks and the waterlogged rubbish along the riverbank. But while I was doing this, I noticed a white ute parked about maybe 20 meters from me. Weird because no one had come in while I was cleaning, and I hadn't seen any other vehicles. I decided to keep my eye on it, just in case, but I didn't approach. By late morning, around 11 a.m., I was moving debris in the river to unclog the small waterfall area. The water had gone sort of stagnant after the floods that happened a few months earlier, so I was shifting logs and rocks to get the flow going again. And that's when I felt it, a sudden intense sense of unease. I look upstream and I froze. There was a man standing completely still on a boulder in the middle of the river, at least 50 feet away. He was wearing a navy polo covered with brown and white circular patterns, the kind of geometric Aboriginal-inspired dot artwork that you see in modern clothing sometimes here. I blinked and looked away for a second, planning to wave and say g'day, when I looked back, and he was gone. There was no sound, no movement, and my first thought was that maybe he'd jumped into the bush somewhere, but the area was open with thin shrubs, and there was really nowhere that he could have gone without me hearing him at least. I shrugged it off at first. I mean, maybe he was moving quickly, or maybe my brain was just on edge from working in the sun all morning. I finished clearing the river section by about 12:30. The water was flowing nicely, sunlight hitting the ripples and insects buzzing, birds flying, all that sort of stuff. But then I decided to check out the boulder where I had seen this guy earlier. I tried a few small bush trails, but all of them sort of dead-ended. There was no path, no tracks, nothing. I realized that it wasn't just hard to reach too, because someone could not have passed through there without me noticing at least. Frustrated, I turned to head back. That was when I came face to face with a huge butterfly. Not a moth, but a proper butterfly, and the wingspan was easily 15 centimeters, flapping slowly. My dad loved these butterflies before he passed, and he'd always told me to look for them, saying that they'd remind me of him. I said out loud, "Show me the way," and the butterfly flapped once, then disappeared into a hidden trail that I'd missed multiple times. I followed it, twisting through the shrubs, getting scratched by twigs and pushing through cobwebs until I finally reached the river again. The boulder? It was gone, though. I mean, not in the river in the middle like before. I looked upstream and suddenly I saw the polo shirt, tied high in a tree, old and faded, torn in parts. Half a dozen other articles of clothing were hung nearby too, all too high for anyone to reach easily. My heart sort of sank at that moment too, because I realized that something weird had happened. I don't know if I had seen a full apparition or some kind of a ghost, but whatever I had seen on that boulder, I'm pretty sure it wasn't human in the normal sense. I turned back to leave in that moment. The bush was absolutely dead quiet too, which was weird. No insects, no birds, nothing. I eventually made it to my van and the ute was now gone. No one had passed me, and the only thing that I had seen the whole day besides the wildlife was that man, or whatever it was, and the butterfly. Packing up, I noticed that the energy around the river had changed. It was heavy earlier, and now it felt almost calm all of a sudden, almost peaceful. Later as well, as if on cue, cars started arriving, kids were playing in the water, locals laughing, even a couple of bikers on black Harleys stopped by the river. Life returned. I still cannot explain it all. I mean, maybe I helped clear the river physically, or maybe spiritually or something, but maybe I just sort of imagined half of it too. I can tell you this though, that day, I'm pretty sure that something was watching me, and it felt like the land itself was responding to what I did. I also went back last year, and the place was absolutely trashed again. Fallen trees, garbage, bad energy everywhere. It's not the same anymore, and honestly, it's kind of depressing. I spent a lot of my childhood moving around, but the place that I lived longest was near the coast of Suffolk in England. I only ever had one genuinely creepy experience that felt off as well, and it happened at a place called Redcliffe Fort. Redcliffe Fort is an old coastal battery. It's centuries old, built in the 18th century, and has a long military history, from defending the coast against invasions to being used in both world wars. Today, it's technically a museum, but it is falling apart for sure. Broken walkways, old cannons rusting away, and a few creepy wax figures dressed in old uniforms. I remember the staff mentioning that they were struggling to keep the place open, because funding was basically non-existent now. I went there with my family when I was about 12. I've always been into history, so I was excited to go, but it was nothing like I expected. While my parents and younger brother lingered around the cannon displays, I wandered ahead. That's when I found the entrance to one of the underground tunnels used for storing munitions back in the day. The stairs down were pretty steep, narrow, and the air smelled damp and musty. The walls were painted white, but they were grimy and sort of peeling a bit. As soon as I took a step, the echo of my shoes seemed way too loud, bouncing off the curved walls in a weird, sort of unnatural way. I didn't like it, but curiosity kept me moving down. About halfway down, I started noticing something strange. It wasn't a shadow or a sound at first, but just a feeling, I guess. Like somebody else was down there watching me. My chest tightened and every instinct told me to turn back. I tried shaking it off, telling myself that it was just my imagination. But every step forward made the feeling worse, like the presence was shifting with me, just out of view. When I reached the other end of the tunnel, there was a display of old rifles, uniforms, and some documents in glass cases. I froze, though, because I could have sworn that I heard faint footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate and dragging. I spun around, but there was no one there. My first thought was maybe another visitor, but the tunnel had been completely empty until that point. I hurried out, and I tried to tell myself that it was nothing, just nerves or the weird acoustics of the tunnel. But when I got back outside, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There were boot prints in the dust by the tunnel entrance, large, heavy boots, the kind that soldiers wore. Except I was alone when I went down there, and those prints had definitely not been there before. I stayed there for a little longer, wandering near the old gun emplacements, but every time that I turned a corner or stepped onto a walkway, I felt that same pressure again, the sense that somebody was right behind me, just out of sight. I finally convinced myself to go back to my parents, and I don't think that I've ever walked faster in my life, in fact. Years later, I did some digging about Redcliffe Fort. Turns out that it has a pretty notorious reputation. People report hearing footsteps in those tunnels, shadowy figures in the bunkers, and voices whispering things like leave or go back. There's one story that really stuck with me too. A soldier stationed at the fort centuries ago supposedly committed some crime and was held in one of the underground cells. Visitors and staff report hearing heavy boots pacing the corridors, and some even claim to have felt invisible hands push them or grab at their arms. I've been in enough old buildings as well, and basements, to know the difference between what is normal and what isn't. And I never went back to Redcliffe Fort alone. Every time that I see photos or videos online of those tunnels as well, that tight sort of panicked feeling comes back to me. Like I didn't just witness a creepy old museum, but a place that holds something that does not want to be disturbed. So me and my sister were sitting in the garden at night after we came home from a walk, and I saw a small flash out of the corner of my eye, but I ignored it at first because I wasn't sure if my mind was just playing tricks on me or not. But then she goes, "Hey, did you just see that flash?" I said yes, and we kept talking for a few more minutes, and while I was facing her, I saw another flash out of the corner of my eye. She saw that too, and then we saw a huge star appear. There were no other stars around that night. Then the star disappears and reappears multiple times. After a bunch of times of this, it disappears and then reappears a couple of inches in the sky away. It did this a few times until it had moved halfway across the entire sky, maybe in about 5 seconds. We started freaking out, and I take her phone and try to record it, but the videos weren't that good. I do have them though, and so I have some proof of it. My sister runs inside the house, and she comes outside with my mum and my other sister, and my mum isn't that impressed because she can't see it moving. It just looks like a regular star at first. She eventually goes back inside, and then immediately after we see the shooting light come back. But this time, there were many of them. But they seemed almost high-tech, and they formed formations that didn't seem to make any sense. We call our mother back outside, and this time she can definitely see them. We stand and watch them for at least 10 minutes, and my mother can clearly see them, so she starts praying, and my sister is freaking out. My other sister didn't come out again. She didn't believe us because the first time she came out, she didn't see anything. My mother and sister start freaking out, and they went inside. I wanted to stay and watch though, but I was sort of scared to be alone outside after seeing that. My sister starts texting her friends, but they don't believe her, so she asks me if we can go back outside so she can try and get a good picture of it. So we go outside and we spend like another 10 minutes recording, but all the videos were pretty bad because it was nighttime. This time we stand and watch in silence though. We even saw a few things that looked like small planes maybe, which would disappear after a few seconds. I watched a small light slowly glide across the sky, and then it would disappear and reappear somewhere else. Similar to the first UFOs that we saw, but this one was far more away. It was really weird to watch because I think I was literally witnessing some sort of like teleportation. It's been 4 hours and I'm still trying to process all this. Also, when they disappeared, they'd sort of shrink and blink or shine similarly to in cartoons when characters would throw something into space. If anyone knows what I'm talking about, then do comment below because I'm not sure of the word for it, but that's what it was like. Then we see multiple lights move at the same speed, and they were making a large square formation. Then I make a joke and said, what if it's one big mothership? And that makes my sister freak out and she runs inside. Now my family is really scared, and my sister even asked me to stay in her room until our dad came home from work. And look, I don't even know if I've even explained the story properly, but this is the weirdest situation of my life, and there's no way that it can be mistaken for anything naturally occurring. That much is clear. A couple of weeks ago too, now that I remembered this, my mum did call my name and shout, "What is that? Look out your window." But by the time that I got into the window, it was gone. I went to ask her what she saw, and she said that it was small and black and flying across the sky at super high speeds. I wasn't really sure what she was talking about, until, obviously, I saw it for myself today. But she saw it during the day. We saw it at night, and she claims that the flying lights that we saw today look like what she saw, but she saw a black thing while we saw lights. Since my daughter, 18 months, was able to wave, babble, and generally interact with people, she's been interacting with someone or something hiding in our closet. It all started with waving. I made the joke that there's a ghost in there, but at the time I didn't actually believe it. Our dogs like to sleep in the closet, so I just figured that she was waving to her. There was only one problem though with that explanation. Anytime she waved, my dog was nowhere near the closet. Then she started babbling. She'd have full-on babble conversations with the closet. We brushed it off as her just being goofy, but sometimes she would hold up toys to show the closet and then babble about it like she was doing a show and tell. Now she's starting to use full sentences, and just this morning she looked over at the closet and said, "Hi, I see you," and waved. This is the first coherent sentence that she has said towards the closet, and it's definitely a little bit unnerving. Again, my dog wasn't in there and she's laying at the foot of the bed. The closet is a small walk-in style closet. There's some built-in shelving up top, some plastic shelving we added, and the door is off the hinges and leaning against the built-in shelving because it fell off and we need to fix it. There isn't a single thing in there that looks like a human or anything. I've always been a bit sensitive to these things, but more so when I was a kid. I like to think that if there was something in that closet that I would feel it, but now I'm doubting myself. For context, we live in a trailer built in the 80s, not even an old house. As far as I know, the only deaths that have happened in this house were a couple of pets the previous owner had, and when my daughter talks to whatever is in there, she always looks up like a tall person is standing there, rather than a cat or a dog. So I've known about the black-eyed children urban legend for some time, but I may have had an actual encounter with one years ago. This happened in Portland, Oregon, around David Douglas High School. I looked up black-eyed children, and there have actually been a few encounters and reports of them in Portland, back in the 90s, I believe. This encounter, though, happened to me during my high school years, so around 2009 to 2011. I can't remember the exact year, but I want to say I was about 14 at the time, and it was late, around 12 or 1 in the morning. Maybe a bit later, but I believe it was a weekend. Anyway, my brother and I were up watching South Park, and we heard a knocking on our garage window. Then I heard a knocking at our window. We had one of those huge windows that covered the front of the house. The curtains were up, but I peeked out of the side and saw a woman. She looked very pale, with black hair, and her eyes were really dark. Now, she very well could have been a tweaker, I know, but it's the next part that creeps me out the most. So after knocking on the window, she then knocks on the door and asks us to let her in. Me being the person that I am, I'm like, heck no, but my brother, who was like 10 at the time, walks over to the door and says that he's going to let her in. I have to forcibly hold him down until the person leaves. My mum and her boyfriend wake up from hearing me holding down my brother. They ask if somebody knocked on the door, and I tell them what just happened. One thing that I had heard is with black-eyed children encounters that sometimes they'll force people to do things with no recollection of them doing it. Why I bring this up is that I asked my brother if he remembers the lady, the knocking or trying to let her in, and he always tells me that he doesn't. To this day, the experience really creeps me out since I ever first heard of the black-eyed children phenomena, because everyone who has claimed to have had an experience with them have said exactly what I experienced. So I know that this is most likely going to sound made up, and honestly that's why I haven't posted it or shared it anywhere yet, but I just cannot seem to get it off my mind, and I'm wondering if anybody has any information or maybe even a similar experience to compare it with. So, I was out in Long Island, New York around the beginning of the new year 2022 when I went out for a late night drive with 2 friends of mine. We were about 40 minutes away from my house when we started feeling just a really heavy presence surrounding us as we went down a specific road. My friend asked if we could turn around and go down the other turn instead, but doing that led us to a dead end, so we had to go back. As we drove down the road that felt menacing, we passed a cemetery at one stage which had 2 what appeared to be humans standing in robes facing a statue of the Blessed Mother and waving what looked like maybe a wand towards it. As we drove by, we noticed that it seemed odd, so we drove into the gate and parked a few feet away from them to watch them. They honestly appeared to be statues at first, but then, without even moving, they started facing us and they started waving their wands over us too. The weirdest thing, though, was that their faces looked largely expressionless, but also had features that really I can only describe as a mix between a witch and maybe a pig. My friend that was driving, he instantly took off upon seeing their faces, and we started to head home, all of us feeling like something malicious was there. As we got further into the drive, we then realized that we were being told to go back in the same direction by the GPS, as the GPS had rerouted us back to the same coordinates that they were at. Needless to say, we did not follow the GPS or go back there, but we all returned home that night, and we also felt sick all night, each of us, which was really weird. Anyway, some time had passed, and I had told another friend of mine about this experience, and he said that he wanted to go there because he had never experienced anything like it. We went, and he started feeling sick as we pulled up again, so he kept driving and we left. But later on that night, he said that he was home with only his girlfriend, and they both heard what seemed to be something running up to the door and violently slamming on it, which also knocked some of the stuff on their shelves down, but when they went looking through the house, there was nobody there. I cannot find any information on anything like this, and I am very tempted to go back, but I just can't get myself to actually do it just yet, out of fear and probably just a lack of understanding. I've been busy dealing with the wake of a family tragedy, but now that things are returning to the new normal, I figured that this was a good time to share this. So first, I'll describe the nightmare. It's a very short dream. It's a very clear memory, just because of how scary it was, I guess, but I was about 4 or 5 years old, perhaps 6 at most, and my twin brother and I had a bunk bed in a room at the farthest end of the house that we grew up in. The nightmare, it had me in my bed looking out the window to see a red sky, the kind that it gets in the early dawn hours before sunrise, but light still colors the sky. The next and the only other thing that I can remember in this nightmare is that a man with crazy blue-colored eyes and a bald head appears at the window and stares right at me. The nightmare ends there, but I remember just how much I screamed and screamed about it. I don't know where my brother was at the time when I woke up screaming, and the only thing that I can remember from when I woke up was having my mum come and get me and calm me down as she took me to her bedroom down the hall. I only remember that so well because I wonder where my dad was at the time. Anyway, fast forward to this May, and my father is in hospital in the country that he lives in, Colombia, and my twin brother and older sister are staying in a hotel about 5 minutes walk away from the hospital that he's staying in the ICU at. One night, after a long day of being there for Dad and for the extended family, my siblings and I return to the hotel and sit together to have a couple of beers and try to relax after all of that. We start discussing things, trying to unwind, but somehow the discussion of nightmares and dreams come up, and I bring up the story that I mentioned earlier. Without missing a beat, my sister straight up explains that had really happened, that some guy really did look through my window, and that she remembers the whole thing. My sister, she's 5 years older than my brother and I, so this would make her 9 to 10 years old, had her bedroom adjacent to the bedroom my brother and I shared. Her room faced our front lawn and street, while our room faced the neighbor's house and their driveway, with a very low fence between the two houses. While she didn't get into too much detail about the days before the nightmares or the event, she said that she had been followed by a bald man in a truck as she rode her bike home with some friends a couple of times before. The day immediately before this nightmare was no different, but the man this time actually drove right past the house. At the time, she was a latchkey kid since my brother and I had to go to a special school about 45 minutes away from our hometown. It was for a speech impediment issue that many twins have, and my mum had to pick us up rather than be home for my sister after school. But she was never home alone for more than maybe max an hour. Anyway, that afternoon and evening was pretty normal as she remembers it. My dad came home from his job. He worked as a part-time cop and worked in a local hardware store, and we all had dinner, did homework, played, and did usual family things before bed. That night, though, at around 12 to 1 in the morning, this bald-headed dude had parked down the street at a small industrial park and walked up to our house and apparently tried to get in through my sister's window, which woke her up, and she screamed when she saw the man nearly opening the window as it wasn't locked. My dad stormed in and tried to shove the guy out or tried to hit him with the nightstick that he had. My sister doesn't remember exactly, but this caused the guy to run off, but only for a short time, as apparently he came back a moment later to try and get into the window in my room. He tried opening the window, but it was locked because my mum didn't want my brother and I to open it, because our bed was right up against it. My sister said that I screamed as loud as I could, and my mum went in to get my brother and I, while my dad tried to go after this guy by running out the front door to chase him. Unfortunately, it was to no avail in the end, as the guy hauled butt right back through our backyard. The way our backyard was situated, it had it backed up right against a small rail yard that is part of the aforementioned small industrial park down the street from us. Between our small neighborhood and the rail yard was a good amount of very dense trees that always made the backyards very, very dark. So my dad, he didn't want to get attacked by him there, so instead he went back inside to our house, called the police, then our elderly neighbor to make sure that they were okay, while our mum took care of us kids. And that was all my sister could remember from that night herself, as this was a very long time ago. Neither of us could recall anything else after that either, and the story just sort of stops right there for both of us. My father sadly passed away in the hospital, so we aren't able to ask him. And given that all of us haven't had the chance to ask our mum yet, maybe we'll ask her soon, but we aren't sure exactly what happened after that. For now, though, it has become obvious that that alleged nightmare that I had, well, it wasn't a nightmare after all. Instead, it was probably an attempted home invasion and a kidnapping. I work full-time as a deputy sheriff in a very rural part of the northern US, right outside of a Native American reservation. Although I do several things for the sheriff's office, I mainly work inside the sheriff's building itself and the jail. In my time in law enforcement, I've seen many things I can't understand, but here are some of the most memorable. Inside the jail lies a medium security housing unit. The inmates stay within their cells from 2200 to 0500. During that time, several inmates are allowed out to assist with cleaning and laundry duties. I've always had a bit of a weird feeling inside of this cell block, but every once in a while my fellow officers, and even some inmates, see a man that we call the Watcher. Late at night, as officers walk the cell block, we will occasionally see a man behind us wearing white inmate worker clothes. Sometimes it's when you turn your head, to check behind you, and sometimes it's right in front of you even. You never seem to know when you'll see him, and a double take results in him always being gone. He appears to every officer the same, and to some senior guys, it's a bit of a rite of passage when for younger officers to ask about the long-haired old guy out of his cell at night. This is also compounded by the fact that odd cries for help are heard occasionally, only for officers to run out of the office checking cell to cell for someone in distress, only to find no one awake. I personally have heard my last name called to me while sitting in this housing unit. I heard it plain as day right next to me, in fact, only for no one to be awake and all the inmates asleep and accounted for. This particular housing unit has a long history of suicides, overdoses, and violent fights for the better majority of the last 3 decades. My first paranormal encounter here started even without my prior knowledge, and other officers only disclosed the information after I inquired. The kitchen is another hotbed of activity too, with the 2 spirits appearing in the same manner and performing the same activities to each that see them. The first, it's a larger man, maybe 6 foot, 250 pounds. Nearly every officer who has seen him describes him in the same context. He can be seen as soon as you unlock the kitchen and look up from your keys. He's dressed in white kitchen worker clothes, standing at the sink washing his hands, as if he's about to start his shift. My first encounters happened right after I was off FTO and started night shift. For nearly 2 weeks straight, I would see him and I would always do a double take, only to see nothing in his place. For weeks I thought I was honestly going crazy, not asking anyone about him. It was only after one day that my supervisor comes running into the office screaming about seeing something in the kitchen, only for his horror to be compounded when I gave an exact description of the individual and the task that he was performing. My supervisor, who is a devout Mormon and a firm critic of anything supernatural, was scared so badly that he refused to enter the kitchen for a very long period of time after that. The second spirit of the kitchen, though, is the exact opposite of the man in white. He is faceless, and only a faint orange glow is seen, the same shade as an inmate jumpsuit perhaps. He's seen when you go to lock the kitchen door. The squeak of an inmate's shoe is heard and an orange glow rushes you as if he's trying to escape the kitchen before the door is closed. The kitchen also has a history of inmate death, with records from the 90s reporting an inmate breaking in and using the kitchen knives to, well, end his own life. But no place in the entire jail has more horror and terror than the maximum security wing. Activity is non-stop, from random door slamming to lights burning on and off. A personal favorite of mine is when you're in there, inmates can be seen at night walking the top tiers on cameras and in person, only for you to rush in about to confront an inmate for being out past bunk up, only for every door to be secure. There's random screams that are heard coming from areas where no inmates are housed. Footsteps happen so regularly that many officers don't even react anymore. But my all-time favorite is the time when an officer witnessed a female inmate, through one-way glass, exit her cell in the middle of the night without him unlocking it. The inmate proceeded to wrap a noose around her neck, climb the railing and jump off the top tier. Several officers witnessed this happen too. Radio calls to dispatch were made, emergency tones rang out, only for the officers to open the cell block door, make entry, and see nothing. The odd thing about this incident, though, was that this cell block only housed male inmates, but several years prior was a dedicated female housing block. One place in the jail that has been terrible in particular over the last several months or years is Cell 19. It has housed dozens of inmates, but most either have some mental episode that results in them being institutionalized or moved out within a few days. Examples include completely normal inmates going to bed, only for them to wake up in the morning screaming, rushing out and giving evangelical sermons warding off evil. Normal inmates getting housed only to have a horror show of health issues in the day following. Heart attacks, strokes, and seizures for inmates normally of good or moderate health. In the most recent case, an inmate who was a prior co-worker of mine at another job attacked several officers inside the cell following cries for help. It took 6 officers, a taser, pepper spray, and a restraining chair to subdue the guy. The reason why officers responded? He was choking out his cellmate completely without cause. Following this, the inmate was placed in an observation area but was seen taking off his socks and shoving them into his mouth, only for him to be saved from passing out when an officer took them out. The inmate in question the next day was seen looking directly into the camera and breaking his hand seemingly without any pain. That man, mind you, is in his 70s too. Many things can be explained to simply being because of the high-stress environment and the nature of jail, right? But many things experienced by officers with no prior knowledge of the happenings, and the fact that they happen so often is why I felt the need to share this. If you think that any of this is false, then simply consider it entertainment, I suppose, but I can assure you that I've lived through it, and it is not pretty. So I am not one of those people that get sleep paralysis frequently. It hasn't happened since this first time, and as far as I know, the same goes for the others involved. The gist is that 10-ish years ago, me and my best friend and my dad had very similar first sleep paralysis episodes on the same night. Granted, as far as sleep paralysis goes, the experiences were pretty textbook. We each woke up, couldn't move, felt dread and fear, and could see a dark figure barely in a field of vision. In my room, it was squatting in front of my door. My friend says that it was beside his bed, and for my dad, he actually says that it was sitting on his chest, strangling him. I know that these episodes by themselves are pretty textbook, but what I cannot explain is the timing of it, with seemingly no common causal factor between us. At that time, my dad and I were in the same house, but we didn't know about each other's experiences until the next day. As for my friend, he wasn't staying with us that night, but he did live right down the street from us. So, am I wrong for thinking the timing of this is too peculiar? It was the first and only time any of us had had sleep paralysis on the same night, even in the same area. I feel like the odds of that happening must be very small, and if there was in fact nothing peculiar about that night, it must just be a coincidence with stupidly astronomical odds. Nearly a decade later, everyone's stories haven't changed too. That friend and I, we've talked about it a few times since then, and the one time that I've asked my dad about it, he remembered it vividly too. So, to conclude, I still have no explanation for this, and it makes me wonder if there really is something more to sleep paralysis. Do any of you know of any similar cases that were suspiciously coincidental like this? Or maybe there's a potential natural explanation that I've missed. Was this mere coincidence, or just highly strange? So last night, I awoke to the unsettling noise of loud banging and my dog's frantic barking. Living alone with my girlfriend, we had grown accustomed to our neighbors' domestic disputes, and I have called the police often on them. I stumbled to the bathroom as the walls there are pretty thin and separated our duplex from theirs. As I approached the bathroom door, the entire house was dark and a tall shadow was in my bathtub. I wasn't wearing my glasses and I am incredibly nearsighted, so I struggled to discern at first whether the shadow was merely the shower curtain or what it was. But then, the shadow spoke. I don't know what he said, but the gut-wrenching panic I felt is still fresh. I screamed and fled back to my bedroom, slamming the door behind me. My girlfriend, now awake and terrified, joined me as I dialed the police. They instructed me to lock the door, but my bedroom doesn't have one. With the banging growing louder and more aggressive, I braced myself against the door, praying that help would arrive in time. To my relief, the police arrived swiftly in only 5 minutes. When I finally emerged from the bedroom, I found that they had dragged him naked from the bathtub because he had been trying to shower, apparently. They were questioning him on my couch, while he was handcuffed, obviously. He was incredibly drunk and had wandered into the wrong house. It was the one night that we forgot to lock our doors. So my family used to celebrate bonfire night when I lived in the UK. If you don't know what that is, well, you probably should have listened in history class. Anyway, our tradition was to buy paper lanterns, write notes to everyone that we lost, put them inside, light them up and watch them burn out into the sky. It's pretty beautiful now that I think about it. I was at my grandma's when this happened and we were all in the back garden from memory. After letting go, we cheered and cried, but we were happy. At one point, my memories are a bit hazy, but the things that stood out were so vivid in my head. I was on my mum's shoulders, and everyone was talking about my great aunt, who'd passed several years before. She was the rock to the family, and my first ever memory of my entire life is with her, in fact. Now, the next door neighbor's house was dark, and nobody was inside. For context, there was a small alleyway in between the two houses that led to a door to the main road. I couldn't see much as it was nighttime, but I looked at the neighbor's house and around until I saw this little girl with very long white hair, and dressed in all white too. It really felt like she was glowing in the dark almost. She was walking down the alleyway, and I freaked out instantly and started crying and screaming at my mum that there was a girl walking down the alleyway. They checked, but there was no one there. Mum said that I was just too tired and needed to go to get some sleep. Weird from her, since she's a big ghost believer, and so I thought that she would believe me, but anyway, now the next part is extra weird. So I actually got the chance to speak to the neighbors one time after this. I don't know how long after, but I was still pretty young. I used to be a bit of a weird kid that was sociable to anyone. Thank you, ADHD, but the man was a really nice guy with a really cute dog. His dog had jumped over the fence to see me in my grandma's garden while I was playing, and this led to a conversation with the neighbor. I asked outright if they had a kid, and he told me no, and that they were waiting for the dog to pass to try and have one. They were a young couple, and I was honestly pretty shook by this. I told him what I saw that night. He took a while to respond, but when he did, he told me to sit down next to him, and he looked me in the eyes and said, "I believe you. I've already seen her before. Don't worry, you're not crazy." Something like that. And out of nowhere, he drops a bombshell on me saying that, in any case, our brains are like cylinders on a satellite in space being controlled by something, and whatever we perceive as life is just simulation. Obviously, these are not his exact words, but it was something close to this. He continued, "That's why I know you're not lying, and that's why ghosts exist." He looked visibly freaked out, told me that I should leave, and I never ever saw them again after that, which is kind of crazy. It was a very strange experience, both the girl that I saw and the conversation with this guy. I don't know if he actually believed what he was saying or if he was just saying it to try and make me feel better, but whatever the case, it was strange. I've only shared this story with those closest to me, but every time I go back to it, fear twists my gut and I instantly get goosebumps and tears welling up in my eyes. Before I tell you guys about it, a little bit of background about me first. At the time, I'm 40 years old, married with 2 children, enjoy walking nature in the mountains, and take photos when the weather permits. I'm not religious, but I try to hold on to Cartesian thinking. This evening of August 22, 2017, all the indicators are green to go and take photos of the Milky Way in the mountains. I'm hoping to get some nice shots with fire trees, or trees at least. At 10 p.m. I throw my gear in my trunk and head up to a village 30 minutes away. Arriving at Bullet, everything's set up, but the weather decides to play a trick on me and the sky is filled with high-altitude clouds suddenly. It's not the first time that this has happened, and after I look at the satellite animations a little further on, the sky seems more cooperative. I take to the road again, heading for Le Creux Devane, a well-known geological circa in the region where I live. When I arrive near the parking lot that leads to the path to get there, I'm greeted by numerous flashing lights. Police, fire department, ambulance, everyone is there, at the top of the mountain, in the middle of the forest. I'm stopped and questioned about my presence, and I explain why I want to go up there. The police explain that the site is not accessible, and ask me to leave. I'm getting tired and decided to go home empty-handed, but that's for another time. But then, a shiver suddenly runs down my spine. I've been driving through the forest for a few minutes when I come to a clearing. I was driving slowly for fear of running over nocturnal animals. And there, in my headlights, there's this, well, he's there. At the side of the road, it's there. My eyes are riveted to this thing. I'll only see him for a few seconds in the end, and the time that it takes to overtake the car, but it feels like an eternity. He's tall, very tall, over 2 meters at least. He's also very skinny, sickly skinny, and his skin is white as a full sledge, completely naked as well. He has a little bit of black hair that's sort of tousled on his head. His arms are crossed over his chest, immense fingers dangling from the tips of his hands, and he's covered in what seems like maybe blood everywhere. He follows me with his eyes staring into mine. I'm overcome by primal fear. My whole body is screaming at me to flee, to get away as fast as I can. It's as if my survival instinct is suddenly begging me to get as far away from here as possible. By reflex, I mash the gas pedal and drive at breakneck speed to reach the edge of the lake and leave this forest that oppresses me. I keep looking in the rearview mirror, unaware of the danger I'm exposing myself to by driving at this speed. The tears of fear are streaming down my face, and they're absolutely uncontrollable. Honestly, I'm terrified to my core, like a 5-year-old whose light has gone out in a cellar. When I finally reach the edge of the lake, I pull over to the side of the road and try to regain my composure. Clinging to reality and the rationality that has always built my life like a lifeline, I feel like I'm suddenly going mad. I'm thinking that maybe somebody has had a car accident and was in distress and I didn't stop to help or something. I hate myself for having reacted so badly if that's the case, for having been overwhelmed by unreasonable fear. So I call the police, still breathing hard. I tell them who I am, that I haven't been drinking or taking drugs, and that they'll probably think that I'm crazy, but no, they're benevolent and listen to me all the way. I finally get home and my fear explodes in my belly, this look never leaving me and piercing me again. I tell him what happened to me and I start crying again. 2 hours later, at 3 a.m, the police, they ring my doorbell. There are 3 of them and they're obviously taking this very seriously. They ask me for more details about the time and the place. Luckily, I know the place perfectly well and give them the GPS coordinates of what happened. The next day, the Crew de Van, where I was heading, made the headlines in the local papers. Apparently, 2 people had died there in the middle of the night in a microlight accident. With no news from the police after several days, I contacted them and also learned that a carcass had also been found several kilometers away with no one at the wheel, but that I had done the right thing by not stopping. I'm 47 years old now and I've been back to that place many times, day and night, because it's a place that I really love. I've always found it hard to believe in the supernatural, even though I'm convinced that many things go beyond our understanding of the world and shatter our certainties. But this one thing, this one event, it always has me questioning, well, everything. I went to a wedding of my friend Courtney about 2 days ago, and I still cannot shake my mind over what happened. For context, I grew up in a very religious household and went to a church every Sunday, and Courtney is probably the only person from my old church that I still keep in contact with. The situation started at the reception. Courtney was super excited to see me, and was definitely the only person who felt that way, judging from all the stares from the people at my old church. I sat down at my table and started playing something on my phone when some guy sat next to me. He said that the seating chart said that he was supposed to sit at my table, and introduced himself as the groom's friend, Anthony. He was pretty cute, so I spent a lot of time talking to him and we really hit it off. He didn't seem to judge me for being an atheist and seemed genuinely interested in me. When the dance started, they started playing Brown Eyed Girl and he offered to dance with me. We danced together for most of the night, until he left to go to the bathroom, and a little later I did too. When I came out, I saw that my purse wasn't on the table, which was weird because I swore that I left it on there. I was tired though and thought that I had just left it in my car, so I went into the parking lot and into my car to look for it, and found it on the center console. I still brought it inside, but at that point it was pretty late in the night, so I didn't think too much of it. I danced some more and noticed Anthony was gone. I asked the groom, who said that he had gone home because he wasn't feeling too good. And pretty soon I started feeling pretty sick too myself, so I said bye to Courtney and went to my car. As I put my keys in the ignition, I looked behind me and saw something weird. It looked like something had ducked down from the trunk. I took my keys out and looked back there, and that was when I saw him. Anthony was crouched down in the trunk of my car. I started screaming and ran out with him chasing after me. I went inside and told Courtney, who immediately told her husband, who walked me back to my car where Anthony was nowhere to be seen. Courtney's husband said that he didn't see his car anywhere, so he probably left. I left, and I still feel sick to my stomach thinking about it. He could have easily gone home with me and killed me if I hadn't have looked back. Courtney said that she feels terrible that she invited him and that she had no idea that he would do that. I haven't stepped out of my house since because I'm worried that if I do, that he'll be waiting for me like he was before. The last couple of days have been a bit crazy for me, but unfortunately my address was on my ID, and as I learned now, Anthony took photos of it. Anthony and the groom aren't exactly friends, but they know each other well enough for him to be invited. After the whole fiasco, the groom tried to text Anthony about it, but got no response. Anthony showed up at my job and was lurking around the parking lot before he ran off when he saw security. He left me a note on my windshield that just says, "I'm watching." Security at my job has been notified about him, so hopefully I'm safe there. I was told by other people that went to the wedding that he was introducing himself as my boyfriend, and that he was planning on proposing. I'm currently trying to file a restraining order against him and feel horrified. He lives in my city and knows where I live, so I'm staying at my aunt's house as I speak, and if anything else happens, I'll be sure to let you guys know. So last night was the first night in, well, a long time that I'd been alone overnight, as my boyfriend went to visit his mother for the weekend. I was talking on the phone when suddenly my call seemed to have been hijacked, and a raspy female whisper with a kind of static sound began to speak in words that I didn't understand, and I quickly got the feeling that I needed to end the call, which I did almost immediately. A short time later, I hear a soft tapping, almost like someone lightly packing cigarettes, right outside of my door, and I have no idea what it was. It went on sort of rhythmically for a couple of minutes, then stopped. Obviously, I was pretty spooked by this, but went to sleep a while later without further incident. Then, shortly after I woke up this morning, I heard a male voice, but it didn't sound like a real person. It sounded like an old record. It was very high staticky, and I couldn't understand some things it said, but it did keep repeating like hey and hi right outside of my door. Neither of these occurrences are particularly worrying, but altogether it gives me the creeps. I'm wondering too if anybody else has experienced anything that you can't see but can hear like this, and that instant feeling that whatever it is, you shouldn't acknowledge it, and that it isn't good. My mum's father died when she was around 18, and ever since I can remember, she frequently visited his grave at the cemetery, decorating it, visiting, and so on. When I was too little to be left alone and my dad wasn't home, she would always take me with her too. Ever since I can remember, I have hated that cemetery. Being there always made me anxious, scared, gave me bad vibes, whatever you want to call it. I would always refuse to get out of the car at first until, inevitably, being alone sitting in the car got too scary, so I got out. The grave isn't far from where you'd park your car on the pathway thing, so I could get out and join my mum easily enough. Because of this, there's a tree nearby between the graves and the road. Getting out of the car always made the feeling worse. Even if I was with my mother, I couldn't wait to get home. This went on for years too, until a few years ago, when I was around 16, I believe, my mum told me a story that literally made my jaw drop. Now, I hadn't gotten out of the car during that visit, and when she got back in, she said, "You know, you've never liked being here, and ever since the first time me and your dad brought you as a baby, it's always been like that." And then proceeded to tell me a story that made the whole thing make a lot more sense. Apparently, when I was a little baby, old enough to sit up on my own and such, I think, my mum and dad took me to the cemetery to visit my grandpa's grave. I was sitting in the grass, happy and all. They were keeping an eye on me, but weren't like all eyes on me sort of thing. I was looking up in the aforementioned tree between the graves and the road, and all of a sudden I just started screaming, like I was being actively stabbed or something. I was just completely terrified. My parents scooped me up and checked me over. There's no ants or bugs on me or on the ground where I was, but I kept crying until they left, eyeing the tree. I don't remember what I saw in the tree, obviously, or I would describe it, but whatever it was, it scared me so bad that it must have scarred me or something. After she finished, it made much more sense to me why I never liked that place and was also just so anxious to be there. I just got back from a mini vacation with my wife in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. The cabin was in a populated area, but hidden from the road on top of a hill. My first impression was that it was a little bit eerie, but I brushed it off and assumed that it was just because of the horror movies that I'd recently watched. The energy inside felt a little bit heavy, but nothing that I couldn't handle. I'm very sensitive when it comes to paranormal energies, and I've lived and worked in haunted places all of my life. This cabin was different, though. The dark energy was overwhelming, and I didn't sleep until daylight for the 3 nights that we were there. In the end, I had to sit in the living room where I saw shadows and the cord on the wall-mounted phone swing and suddenly start and stop again. There were banging noises and also the sounds of someone walking through the hallways. Also, I could absolutely not take being in the bedroom. It was filled with mirrors. My wife would wake up every morning at around 3 a.m. and be unable to fall back to sleep. The 3rd night, I couldn't take it anymore. The dark feelings almost had me in tears and an anxiety attack. So we left the next evening, taking a loss on our last night booked at the cabin. I just hope that whatever it is, that it didn't follow me home. I bought my house in 2013 and was aware that before we moved in, an elderly lady had lived there for around 4 years before passing away. But we never learned if the woman passed away in the house, but I was not worried about it at the time. This is just for some context, as I'm not actually sure to this day that anyone actually died in the house. Anyway, in June of 2013, one night before we moved the furniture to the new house, my wife and our 2 toddlers were painting and it was getting pretty late. My wife decided that she would take the kids and head to my parents' house for the night. While I was painting alone in the master bedroom, I heard the toilet seat slam down violently in the guest bathroom on the other side of the wall where I was painting. I mustered my courage up and walked around the corner down the hallway, stepped into the bathroom and turned the light on, only to find that the toilet seat was up. The second thing that happened was in December of 2013. I remember this because it was around Christmas time and we had just finished loading up the car to head out to Florida from Texas. I had just gotten into the car that was parked in the garage facing the road. My wife was inside, checking that everything in the house was set for our 2-week trip. Shortly after I had sat down and started the car, my wife sat down next to me and shut the door. And almost immediately after my wife sat down, I swear that I saw a figure of a person walk behind the car in my rearview mirror. I looked at my wife and asked if she saw that, and with a cold look of fear on her face, she muttered, "Yeah." I ended up searching the house for 15 minutes because I was convinced that somebody must have been in there, but in the end I found nothing. The last occurrence that happened was actually in 2016. It was late and I was in the office playing Minecraft on my PC. I fell asleep while playing in my chair with my shirt off and woke up to the touch of a hand on my chest from behind me. While still sort of half asleep, I started to open my eyes and felt nails digging into my skin and sort of yelped. I jumped up and went into the living room and flipped the light on and had 3 claw marks on the left side of my chest. Additionally, my wife had just been given 2 Japanese geisha dolls that were set on the mantle over our fireplace, and I got a really eerie feeling upon looking at them as I walked into the living room and threw them away. So this may have been something else, I'm not too sure. The dolls were bought at an antique shop and were a gift, but still, there was something off about them, and so, in the end, I got rid of them. This happened when I was 16. I was staying with my best friend at an old plantation house in Inverness, Mississippi. It had a very old shack out back on the property. We had been on the Ouija board earlier, and afterwards I set a video camera on the staircase, aiming at the Ouija board. After watching the recording, we noticed orbs coming out and back into the Ouija board. I didn't even know about orbs at the time, but I just thought that it was pretty cool. I didn't realize that we'd actually captured something very interesting. Really, I wish that I still had that tape too. Anyway, later that night at around 3 a.m., my friend's nephew, who was about 3 at that time, came out of his room walking in a sort of daze. We asked him what he was doing, and he didn't answer. So we asked again, but said his name. He sort of looks at us and says, "Isa not Nicholas, my name is Samuel. I live out back in the slave house." This was not Nicholas's voice too. I mean, he had never heard anyone speak in that sort of slang before. He then turned around and went back to his room and went to sleep. I asked my friend if Nicholas had ever spoken like that, and he just slowly shook his head. We were both pretty freaked out, but not scared. Nothing ever felt really malevolent or anything. I'm 42 now and starting to realize that my life is on a downward spiral to death. It honestly scares me, and I just want to be with my family and friends again after this life. When I start to doubt myself about it just being nothingness, after I reminded myself about what I experienced that night, I always feel a little bit better. It hasn't been religion or anything like that that makes me believe that there's something after this. Instead, it was that experience that night. I know what I experienced, and I know that someone entered back into our reality for just a couple of minutes then. So they had to be, well, somewhere else. And that is what gives me some comfort when I think about death. So back in 1995, I was 12 at the time, I finally decided to play the Ouija board with my dad. I should preface that my dad used to do a lot of seances and other occult things like tarot. As a result, he had some pretty unsettling encounters that he told me about, which I might share another time. But for now, we go through with this game and we ask the usual questions, and I distinctly remember how unusual the movements of the glass piece felt. It didn't feel like controlled, natural movements. In any case, later that night we started watching TV, and I kept seeing these little green human-shaped figures pop up in the corner of my eye, and when I tried to look directly at them, as usual, nothing was there. This goes on for about 5 minutes, and my dad starts laughing and says, "You see them too, huh?" I thought that he was trying to scare me, and so instead of telling him what exactly I saw, I said, "See what?" He laughs again and says, "Those little green guys." This comment was honestly one of the scariest things that I have ever experienced to this day, and afterwards, I have never touched a Ouija board again. That last piece of this story involves going outside with him so he could smoke, and our black inside-outside cat hissed at us and the house and jumped off the van and ran off down the neighborhood and didn't come back until late the following afternoon. He also knew that something was seriously wrong, obviously. People say that Ouija is fake, but depending on who is using it, their openness and location, I think, it opens areas that shouldn't be opened. It's been almost 30 years, and that moment still sticks with me, and I never ever considered that game ever again. Over Valentine's Day weekend, my new wife and I spent our honeymoon in New Orleans. We stayed at the St. Charles Hilton near the French Quarter. It happens to be an old Masonic lodge from the early 1900s. The building is beautiful and has been rebuilt or added onto over about 100 years. It is an 18-story hotel with ballrooms, a Masonic chapel, and a secret theater even. Now, the first night there, we had some bad dreams. I don't really have bad dreams. I tend to have more lucid dreams, so it felt strange, but things definitely got weirder. On Thursday, February 13th, my wife and I woke up early, took the streetcar to the Garden District, and wandered through the streets for a bit. We visited an old cemetery and checked out the architecture and some shops on Magazine Street. We had such a great time walking the streets that we wandered back to the French Quarter on foot. We kept exploring the town and had some food and drinks and all that. We got on each other's nerves a little bit by the end of the night and returned to the hotel around 1 a.m., a bit tipsy, but not out of line for us. We promptly went to bed, and around 3 a.m. I found myself in a dream on the 3rd floor of the hotel. Our room is on the 5th. I just came off of the elevator and peeked around the corner to a seating area outside of the ballroom. There was a woman dressed in a black lace high-collared dress sitting on the couch, and it looked as if she were cradling something. Her dress was old. She was dim in color, and her dark hair was up in a sort of coiffed bun. I stared at her for a bit, pulling back and then peeking again. Next thing I knew, I was on the elevator again, and the doors opened to the 1st floor where there were 3 big lights glowing purple, green, and yellow, the Mardi Gras colors. At this point, my dream seems to change, and I realize that I'm not wearing any clothes except my big pink granny panties, like the dreams most folks have in high school or college. I started to panic. The only thing that I can think is that there are bathrooms on the 2nd floor, and the dream sort of fades again, and I'm trying to open the bathroom doors on the 2nd floor, but they're locked. At this point, I remember that we have a room on the 5th floor. I hurry to the elevator, cupping myself. I get to the room, pounding on the door, calling my wife's name, and after a minute, she finally lets me in, and we both freak out as I tell my story. It was 4 a.m. at this point, and yes, I was wandering the hotel in the middle of the night, naked for who knows how long. She didn't hear me leave, and the door was heavy enough that I had to work to open it. After a good panic attack, I called the front desks. The gal didn't want to talk about it, but assured me that nobody could get the videotapes without a subpoena. We both took time to calm down a bit, and I eventually went back to sleep at around 6 in the morning. Now, I have not slept walk since I broke my arm and my collarbone when I was about 4. I tried talking about the incident with the night security gal on Friday, but she said that she doesn't mess with that stuff. On Sunday, I asked the evening front desk gal about ghosts in the building, and she told me of a man on the 5th floor, a woman in black on the 3rd, and a woman in white that was seen anywhere between the 2nd and the 14th. Technically 13th due to skipping it, but She told me about the building history and the Masonic Lodge, and gave me a cool printout of the history of the building. I then told her my story, and she was creeped out but wanted more details about the woman in black because she wasn't seen much. She believed me though, and honestly that felt pretty great. Over the rest of our stay though, we still had some rough dreams, and sleep only came to me after about 4 in the morning. The TV also turned on by itself multiple times, which was very weird. I still don't know really what happened that night, and I have no idea how I ended up on those floors and what was going on, but I cannot help but think that maybe I was possessed or something. So, before I begin this, I would just like to say that this is a true story, and I am also of sound mind. So when I was 7, my family moved into a haunted house. There was an abandoned house that my friends and I would pass on our walk to school. It was in need of a lot of work, the grass was overgrown like a hayfield, and the driveway all tore up. It looked like it hadn't been lived in for years. And well, my friend and I decided one summer day to check it out. We thought that it would be a good idea to smash some of the windows out. We broke a sliding glass door and poked our heads in, and it immediately gave us chills. It was super eerie and oddly cold for a summer day in there. We dipped out and we never went back after that. Well, fast forward a few months and my parents tell me that we're moving. I jump in the truck to go with them to look at the house, and when we arrived, my heart instantly sank because it was that same house. I was really nervous. I thought that they knew my friend and I had broken the windows and I was about to get in trouble or something, but they didn't say a word about it, and it was just by some sort of fluke chance that it was the same house that apparently we were buying. We ended up moving in, and my stepdad fixed the place up a bit. It was still eerily cold inside, and I remember the layout being very strange. The kitchen, for instance, that was in the basement, and there was a long L-shaped hallway that went behind the kitchen and really led to nowhere. The weird events, though, they started happening shortly afterward. The first one was when I was laying in bed one morning. I was awake but with the covers over my head, and I felt something that I can only describe as a fist being dropped onto my face. I ripped the covers down off of my head immediately to see who it was, but nobody was there. I kind of shrugged it off as a really weird occurrence, but later I'd find out that something was in that house and it was really ticked off at me. I can only assume that it was mad at me for breaking the windows or whatever, but I was walking down the stairs to the basement one day when I felt a shove in the middle of my back. It pushed me off the last 2 steps, like plain as day, as if somebody was behind me. I obviously glared behind me, but there was nothing there. Again, I shrugged this off as another weird occurrence, until it happened again. Exact same staircase, exact same steps. Something pushed me for a second time off of the last 2 steps. I really didn't want to tell anyone because I figured that they would think that I was going crazy or something. And truth be told, I thought that I might have been a little bit crazy. But fast forward a few months and my stepdad tells us that he had something freaky happen to him. He said that he was doing the tile in the bathroom and said that he saw a face in the tiles looking back at him. But it wasn't his reflection, it was a completely different face. Well, we ended up moving out of there and decades went by before I even thought about it again. I told my wife the story and wanted to bring her to the house. We drove to it and lo and behold, it was exactly as it was almost 30 years ago. Abandoned, the grass overgrown, and no renovations done on it at all. I drove by it the other day, and now it looks like somebody might be living there. I would genuinely love to talk to them to see if they experienced anything, but I also really don't want to freak them out, which really is what brings me here. What do you guys think that I should do? Should I just go and talk to them, or should I approach this a little differently? So I want to share a story of my childhood home in upstate New York, and I thought that you guys might like it. I personally don't know if I believe in the paranormal because, other than this house, I haven't experienced anything else. So, when my dad and my mum first bought this house, my dad was working at a nearby music store. I think it was anyway. While working here, he said that a very suspicious old man would come in, often wearing bones on his necklace. My dad, being punk and 20-something, thought that this necklace was awesome and asked the old man about it. The old man told him that they were real bones. My dad, messing with the old man because he didn't believe him, told him that he wanted a human skull. The man said that he could get him one. My dad thought that this was hilarious, and after a couple of weeks went by, he started to forget about it. But one day, that man came in and actually gave my dad a skull. My dad was very surprised, obviously, but assumed it wasn't real, and so he took it home. My mum, who is very superstitious, was really mad at my dad and told him to get rid of it. My dad decided to put it into the basement and forgot about it, and after this, the house was just never the same. My aunt told me that she saw my brother, who was probably a toddler around this time, being held by a little girl out of the corner of her eye. My mum also claims to have seen this little girl hanging around me and my brother's rooms when we were toddlers. My mother soon began to have horrific dreams and would see people standing by her bed. She woke up on multiple occasions screaming bloody murder and claiming that there were men in her closet. Weirdly too, sometimes she wouldn't even remember these fits. Now, when I was around 5, I started to have extreme night terrors as well. I would also sleepwalk, and one night my mum woke up in another scared frenzy that she would have. She quickly went to my room to see that I wasn't there. She went downstairs to see me sitting crisscross applesauce in front of the TV that wasn't even on. When she asked what I was doing, I told her that I was watching my show and that I wanted to hang out with my friends outside. I don't remember this, by the way, but my mum carried me upstairs and put me into bed. Eventually, too, my brother played with a Ouija board and claimed to see my mum standing up straight in bed with her eyes staring forward. When he tried to talk to her, she simply got back into bed and just went back to sleep. Another time, another thing that would happen is that you could hear people walking up and down the stairs, even when you were home alone. There was often knocking on my walls as well, and after my parents got divorced, my mum decided to move out of this house. The basement was very big and cluttered, so we called someone with a big garbage truck to help us empty it out. When my dad moved out, he didn't go looking for the skull because he had forgotten where he had put it down there, and after cleaning out the whole basement, going through everything, we never found that skull. There was no creepy history in that house as well, mind you. We actually knew the woman whose father built the house in the 80s, and other than this woman's family, we were the only other people to live there at the time. The last time that I was in that house before leaving, I truly felt terrified as well, like something was telling me to get out and leave. I ended up running out of that house in the end, and now my mum and I sleep just fine, and I have not experienced anything else like this, paranormal or whatever otherwise, since we moved out of that place. So I would just like to say that my knowledge of all things paranormal is extremely limited. So please, keep that in mind if I sound like a total idiot here. Also, if you have any questions, then do feel free to ask me in the comments below. I know that I'm awful at explaining things. So, I've told this story to a few of my close friends, but besides that, nobody really knows about this. To set the scene, I'm 12 years old and it's a cold Ohio winter. My parents were divorced, and on this particular day, I was staying with my dad and his girlfriend at the time. His girlfriend had a daughter, Allie, 14, and she had a boyfriend, Evan, 14. At this time, I saw Allie as a sister because I grew up with 5 brothers and no sisters, so I wanted her to be my sister so bad, and on this particular night, Allie and Evan had invited me to join them at a youth group event across town. I was reluctant because it was for high schoolers only and I was in the 7th grade, but they eventually convinced me and so we went. We walked across town in the freezing cold, and after about 20 minutes, we made it to the right building. I don't remember if the building was actually a church, but it was a 1-story building. There were doors on both ends that were connected by a hallway, so if you looked in the glass on one door, you could see down to the other door, is what I'm getting at. But when we got to the building, nobody was there and the only light on was a singular light in the hallway. We were annoyed that Evan had gotten the date wrong and we walked in the cold for no reason, and so we decided to rest at the building for a few before making the walk back home. As we approached the building, I remember Allie looking into the window on the first floor. I remember watching her jaw drop as she looked into it. Next, Evan looked in and started describing what he was seeing, a tall figure in the hallway. My heart dropped, but I honestly thought that they were just messing with me. But then I looked and I saw it too. As I looked in the window, I see a tall figure in the hallway, but it looks like it's crouched down. It has insanely long arms and legs, and when I look in its general direction in the process of standing up, immediately I can tell that it is as tall as the ceiling is. It was wearing a suit or something and had extremely pale skin but no face. And as it's standing up, it's waving its arms around like crazy. The figure looked eerily similar to the Slender Man, but I know that that's just a creepypasta. Really, I don't know how else to describe what was standing in front of me, but immediately I take my eyes off of the window, but because we were dumb kids, we decided to take a walk around the building before we left. I tried to avoid looking through the windows, but there was a sort of tapping noise that I heard as we made our way around it. I'm not sure that was anything paranormal, but it was weird, and so I thought that I should add it. One final note too is that I talked to Allie years after it happened, and I am like 99.9% sure that it wasn't something that they had planned just to scare me. I think that we all genuinely saw this thing, and I'm just so curious to know what it was and what any of this means. So if there is somebody out there who knows what this is or can give me any sort of information about it, then I would really love to hear your thoughts. So back in 2017, my wife, or girlfriend at the time, and I were living in this house as young adults, 19-ish years old. I was smoking a bit, not even good weed too, but just some mid stuff, and we were watching something on TV. My wife wasn't smoking. The TV is hanging on the wall, and to the left of the TV is the hallway. The left side of the hallway is the bathroom, the right side is the spare bedroom, and the straight back was our bedroom. While watching TV, I noticed a black shadowy figure glide through the bathroom door, glides across the hall and goes into the spare bedroom. Obviously, it didn't open any door, just sort of went through them. The figure was roughly about 5 feet tall, I would say, and very broad-shouldered. So I see the figure appear and disappear. I instantly thought that my weed was laced or something. I started looking at my blunt, even though I felt fine, and I really didn't say anything about it. I thought that I was just seeing things, so I started laughing a bit. While this happens though, our dogs were laying at my feet until the figure appeared and they were suddenly terrified and got on the couch with us. My wife asks, "Why are you laughing?" and I replied with, I thought that I saw something." And she immediately replied with, "Did it come out of the bathroom?" That's when we talk about what we had seen, and we both were seeing the same thing apparently. Same description of it and everything. After it disappears, I get back up to check the spare bedroom and whatnot, make sure all the doors are locked and all that, no windows open. I check the ceiling fan because it was on, just to see if the shadow of the fan blades could have possibly been whatever that we saw, but there's just no way possible that it could have been that fan. With the dogs getting scared and just being able to sense a great presence of energy that night, I fully believe that it was a ghost or a spirit or a demon or something similar. 7.5 years later, and I have never experienced anything remotely close to this again. The backstory to the house too is that it was my wife's aunt's house and she had let us take over to rent it while she moved out with her boyfriend. I don't know much about the house otherwise, but the aunt never experienced anything like this and thinks that we were just tweaking out on weed. Note too that we stayed in this house for a few more weeks before we finally moved out. This is a true story of an experience I had as a child with what I knew at the time as the Moose Man, but which I now suspect was a Wendigo. I have told several of my close friends about this, and I think back on it often, wanting to write it down all the time, so here I am. When I was a child, my family would go to my grandmother's house for Thanksgiving. I was one of the youngest of our cousins, of which there was a large group. My grandmother had a secluded home, backed up to the expansive woods. Her house was adorned with Native American artwork and artifacts. My cousins and I would go off and explore the woods behind her house together, walking atop old rock walls and playing with the frogs in nearby ponds. The air was sweet and thick back there, and so it was really pleasant. The area was historically home to a large Native American population, and there were some interesting features in the woods evidencing that history, including an abandoned sweat lodge covered in animal hides, which I always was too afraid to explore, and old stone arrowheads in the dirt as well. Well, one Thanksgiving, one of my older cousins and I paired off from a larger group when we were back in the woods, seeking to explore further into the woods than we had ever gone before. We walked about 15 minutes or so through a fairly thick, unfamiliar portion of the woods when we arrived at the top of a large rock outcropping at the edge of a steep embankment. The hair on my arm still stands up thinking about this too, and even right now as I share this it does too, but I saw a tall humanoid figure in ragged clothes at the bottom of the embankment, about 30 to 40 feet down, facing away from me and my cousin. I was curious but wary, wondering if the figure were a dummy or maybe someone that was injured and needed our help. I considered calling out, but saw the figure move slightly, and suddenly I was full of fear. Without making a sound, I tapped my cousin and signaled for him to look down at the figure. We looked back at each other, and I was hoping for a sense of reassurance, but I could see a dread in his eyes that shot down my spine. And when we looked back down at the figure, it turned toward us. This tall, lanky, ragged humanoid figure had the face of a moose, and it was looking dead at me. We locked eyes, and I cannot explain why, but I knew that it wanted to eat me. We didn't wait, we didn't even scream. My cousin and I just ran away as fast as we could possibly run, back the same way that we had come in. As I ran, I could feel that we were being pursued, and I was younger and a step slower than my cousin. The air also suddenly grew thicker and hazier, and the woods changed around us. All of a sudden, my cousin and I came into the clearing in the woods that did not exist when we had passed through originally. The air there was particularly thick, almost green with fireflies floating everywhere. The ground in the clearing was also marked with circles of mushrooms. It was very disorienting, and it felt like the clearing was sort of luring me in to stay forever, when all of a sudden I heard my mum call out to me through the woods. She, along with some of my uncles and aunts, came to look for me and my cousin. We were the last two in the woods, and it was getting darker. It was time to sit for Thanksgiving dinner. Her call, though, pierced through the fog of this experience, breaking whatever curse was on me and my cousin, allowing us to finally run away and escape. My cousin and I, we told the others what we had seen, that we had been pursued by a moose man who wanted to eat us, but obviously nobody believed us. And I mean, I probably wouldn't have believed my own senses either, if not for what happened next. You see, after dinner, all of the kids went back outside to play in the yard, running behind the sheds and cutting in and out of the woods at the edge of the yard, evading and capturing each other in a game called Manhunt. I was still afraid from before, but took comfort in numbers and proximity to the house as well. As a large group of us were trying to locate the last of the fugitives, one of my cousins shone a big flashlight into the woods. And there, our whole group saw one of our fugitive cousins in a bush, and standing right behind him was a tall, ragged humanoid figure with the head of a moose towering over the bush. We all instantly screamed and sprinted back inside. And that was obviously the end of the games, that day at least. Sometimes I bring up this event with my cousins to see if they still remember, and they do, but they really hate to talk about it. This all started when I was 6, and lasted until I was about 8. I lived in a house with my mother, my 2 brothers, my mother's friend Tracy, and Tracy's boyfriend Paul, along with 3 of their boys. I was the only girl with 5 boys. This house was in a small town in Ohio as well, and since I was the only girl, I had to have a room by myself while all the boys slept together in the same room. And every night, and it never missed a night, I was awoken terrified to a little boy screaming and crying, while I would hear a woman say, "Shush, almost done." You would think that this could possibly be one of the other boys in the house, and my mother or Tracy comforting them, right? Wrong. You see, after many nights of being awoken and terrified, I would start to sleep with my mother, and I still remember the first time seeing this little boy. It was one night when I was sleeping with my mother, and she got up to go to the bathroom. I was hearing the same thing this night, so I ended up following her. When my mother was done in the bathroom and we were walking back into her bedroom, I look into the empty room, which isn't a bedroom, and I see a black small silhouette of a little boy standing there staring dead straight at us. I ignored it and followed my mother back to bed, but I would like to add that every night I could hear the woman walking back and forth down the hallway whispering. I remember one night in particular that I was laying there under the blankets terrified, humming to myself while the same thing happened, when out of nowhere I hear a woman whisper into my ear, "You're mine." That morning I saw the little boy again. I was laying in bed wide awake and I could see out the bedroom. This bedroom was at the end of the hall, by the way. And you know how the end of the hallways where there's like a wall? Well, I saw the same little black silhouette of a boy come out of the wall and walk slowly down the hall, staring straight ahead of him. I would like to add as well that I knew each time the crying and screaming would eventually stop, but still, that didn't make it any less terrifying. I lived by a railroad, and every time the railroad would go in the very early of the morning, all of it would stop. Fast forward a couple of months, and everybody's thinking little me was crazy because nobody heard or saw anything at night. Until Paul Tracy's boyfriend spoke up and said that if he's up late at night by himself, he would also hear and see, and I quote, sketchy stuff. I cannot remember any specific circumstances after the ones that I mentioned above, but like I said, this happened for years, and I tried to look up any information about the house, but I couldn't find anything. I used to think that it was just spirits, but now that I'm older, I believe that it truly was something darker than just spirits. This happened to me a year ago, outside of a famous department store in Mexico while I was waiting for the bus. That day, I went to buy a birthday cake for my best friend, among some other things. So I had a lot of things to carry, and I usually walk home. It's not that far, but since I had a lot to carry, I decided to wait for the bus. It was around 4 p.m., and since I was in a very central part of the city, there were a lot of people walking around and waiting for the bus. So I found what happened next really, really strange. I was leaning against a window of the department store while carrying the bags and trying to keep my balance so the cake wouldn't slip, when a woman approached me and started talking to me. I don't know what I look like, since people always approach me to talk to me easily, even though I'm quite introverted, so it didn't seem too strange to me at the time. However, one of the first things that she said to me was a warning. Something like, "Be very careful with your things. There are very bad people around. Someone can steal from you." I took it as kind words and really didn't pay too much attention to it. However, the woman began to ask me where I lived, what bus I took, what my parents' names were, what they did for a living, where I would go. The questions were probing, to say the least, and it gave me a bit of a bad feeling. So I lied about all of them, following my mother's advice regarding strangers. And then she began to tell me nonsensical things about her personal life, and she really just had no verbal coherence. I didn't understand anything she was saying, as if she was telling me random stories and connecting them in sort of absurd ways. I noticed that there was something very weird about her when I examined her too. Her face was delirious, looking almost to the sky, her eyes opened wide when she spoke nonsense to me, and she had a disheveled appearance that I had not noticed before. I sincerely thought that she had schizophrenia or something like that, and then she began to get very close to me, invading my personal space and repeating the same warning from the beginning over and over again. I began to get scared by this, and I moved away from her. Even a woman saw us and also seemed surprised. And at some point, the woman cornered me and got so close to my face that I felt as if I was being harassed or something. I forgot to mention too that when I said which bus I would take, she suddenly said that she was going to take that one too, even though she told me that she was going somewhere different. She spontaneously made up that she was going to visit her brother or whatever, and that's why she would take that bus with me. I then told her that I think it would be better if I walked in the end because the bus was taking too long, but she just would not let me go. And when I insisted on going, she told me that she would accompany me because she was going to the same place. Honestly, I didn't understand what she was saying, and in the end, already quite nervous and scared, I told her that I would walk, and I said goodbye pretending to be nice, and I simply walked to leave, and then she started following me from behind for about a block. When I turned to change street, I had to run without even caring about the cake until finally I lost her. I've had to omit a few observations to keep this shorter, but I got the impression that if she didn't have any intentions of assaulting me at any opportunity, then maybe she was waiting for us to be alone somewhere so that she could do something worse. Sometimes these are kidnapping tactics in Mexico where there are more people involved and all that. Luckily, it was the afternoon and there were a lot of people still walking around, but really, I don't know what would have happened if I had gotten on that bus. Would she have followed me? To what extent, and to do what? I still don't know, but I'm glad that I never had to find out. Years ago, when I was 11 and living in Hawaii, I had an intense feeling of dread all of a sudden. Just absolute dread hanging over me. I believe it started Friday and kept building till Thursday. Then next Friday it comes again. I go to school and strangely I don't feel it at all, but the second that I get home, there it is, and it's worse than before. I knew too that somebody was going to die that day. I absolutely knew it was going to happen to somebody in my family. I spent all day in the living room watching everybody like a hawk as well. I didn't feel it directed towards anyone until later that night, once it got dark. It had been building and building, and I felt like I was going to explode. Then my mother walks by me and grabs her keys and says that she's going somewhere. I didn't really listen. The blood in my ears was too loud, and all I could see was the keys in her hand and her mouth moving but no words. And I knew then that it was her. If I let her go in that car, I knew that I would never see her alive again. And I flipped out. I had an absolute freak out. I threw myself at her feet and grabbed onto her legs and started begging and screaming for her to stay home. Just begging and pleading for her not to leave. I was absolutely hysterical as well, and I just couldn't control my emotions at all, switching between gut-wrenching cries, pleading, and attempting to grab the keys from her hand. At some point, I started saying, "I don't want you to die," over and over again. "If you leave, you're going to die." She was so startled and scared by my behavior that she sat on the couch next to me and held me and put on the news for ambient noise. I had successfully gotten her not to leave the house. This probably happened around late 8 o'clock, but distraught 11-year-olds do not check the time, nor care to. It's now roughly 9-something, and my mum decides to switch channels to a different news channel. The story being told was kind of inappropriate. But by that time, I had kind of calmed down a little bit, but was still sniffling. The feeling of dread had died, but a weirder, more undescribable feeling had replaced it. Kind of like anticipation, but with a negative spin, but definitely not dread anymore. The news channel that she chose was describing and showing helicopter footage of a 13-car pileup on the main road that connects to the road leading to our neighborhood. And it had happened around the time she would have left, and they were still covering it. There were only a few survivors. Almost everyone had died, and the survivors were severely injured, and they weren't sure that they would even make it. The pileup happened on the road that she definitely would have taken. We both sat riveted to the TV, watching them interview the bystanders who had witnessed everything, and the people who had barely avoided the crash. They were shaken, terrified, and crying. They interviewed a man that had tried to save people from the crash, and he was covered in blood and describing the bodies and talking about how he couldn't save anyone. He was beyond shaken, and his body was jittery from the adrenaline and fear. Me and my mother, we just sat in silence. My little siblings were there too. They had come out when they had heard the screaming, but I don't really remember them doing much, so they aren't very relevant to the story. What happened afterward is a little bit of a blur for me because the sheer relief or devastation that I felt was awful. My mum lived, obviously, but all of those other people had died, and it really felt rotten. I hugged my mum and thanked her for not leaving. She said that she was glad that she didn't leave too, but didn't really speak much, and honestly, I can't blame her. I mean, what's there to say? Me and my mum slept in the same bed that night, and I still couldn't let her go. I needed to know that she would be okay and would still be alive in the morning. She didn't ask me how I knew, but made an offhanded comment about me being psychic the next day. I guess I forgot all about this, but I remembered it all today and have been feeling all sorts of things ever since then. I confirmed everything with my mum as well, and she says that it was the weirdest experience of her life. I still feel kind of crazy. I mean, my brain forgot about all this, but my body remembers the strain of the dread that I was under. I'm feeling the physical effects of it at this very moment, in fact. Almost like PTSD-like symptoms. I thought that I would share my story about my grand's house. I'm aware of 4 events that happened in that house, and I'll caveat by saying that I'm probably best described as a curious skeptic. Paranormal stuff, it definitely fascinates me, but I'm by no means claiming that there isn't a rational explanation. So, I'll get the first incident out of the way. It probably happened first to my knowledge anyway. My granddad died roughly 10 months before I was born. My cousin is the youngest in the family to have met him, and she claims that when she was staying at my grand's house one night after he had died, she woke up and he was allegedly standing at the end of the bed watching her. I say, get it out of the way, because that's literally all I know, and frankly my cousin is terrible and she lies, so who knows. But the remaining events occurred in a different room to the one my cousin claims to have had an experience in. This room was the smallest bedroom, and I hated this room. For as long as I can recall, I hated how it made me feel, and I used to always say that it was haunted, even before I had any experiences that I couldn't quite explain. But one of the weird feelings came from behind the door where there was a narrow recess in the wall. It was maybe 15 inches across, and my gran used it to store loose odds and ends, like rolls of wrapping paper and such. But for some reason, I always felt like something was watching me out of that little gap in the wall. One time, I was probably 5 years old. I was staying the night at my gran's place and had to sleep in that room. Despite every effort to make the room friendly by putting up Barney wallpaper, for non-UK or perhaps younger UK readers, this was not Barney the dinosaur, but a cartoon from the late 80s, early 90s, about an old English sheepdog. But I still hated that room. I got told that it was time for bed, and so I made my way up the stairs. At the top, the stairs turned to the right into a short landing, and I had to come back on myself to get to the room at the end, but as I turned, I froze. On the white wooden door in front of me, I could see a face with horns looking back at me. The only way that I can describe it, though, was that it was almost like seeing it in my mind's eye rather than a physical mark, but I would swear to you that it was right in front of me, looking at me from the door. Now, it could have well been a product of a child's vivid imagination, but it sufficiently freaked me out enough to make me cry with fear and panic. I quickly ran back downstairs to get an adult, and said that there was a face on the door. When I was brought back upstairs, though, it was gone. The third incident happened when I was about 13. My gran was the only one in the family who had Sky TV, so I would regularly go and visit so that I could watch wrestling on TV. On this particular day, I was downstairs watching and my gran was upstairs. Usually she was just sewing when she was upstairs. She had one of those old Singer sewing machines, a big cast iron unit with a solid wooden frame. My gran was like 4'9" as well, a tiny woman, with her healthiest years definitely behind her. But anyway, I was downstairs watching The Rock do his thing and I heard a terrific bang from upstairs. I rushed upstairs to check my gran was okay when I saw her come out of her bedroom, and the sewing machine, which easily weighed upwards of 30 pounds, was on the floor having tipped itself over. She and I both had no idea how that had happened. Now lastly, some years later, I was speaking to my aunt and she had spent a lot of her childhood in the 60s and 70s growing up in that house. She said that that room had been her bedroom, and she told me that she also hated this room and thought it to be haunted, and that she had had an experience of her own in there. You see, the bedroom sat at the front side of the house and had one window, which was directly above the front door, and she recalled that one day she was out in the street playing with her friends while her siblings and parents were at work. She is the youngest of four, and something made her look up at the house, and in the window, she could see the figure of a man standing looking out onto the street, despite knowing for sure that there was nobody home. So, that's the story of my grand's house. Unfortunately, we have no ties to the house anymore, as she moved out in around 2010 and she died in 2012. But I still regularly think about that house and the weird feeling I got in that bedroom throughout my childhood, and only ever in that bedroom. Not the rest of the house, only there. So, if you've managed to stumble through all of my rough memories here, then thank you. And I would be interested to know your thoughts about any of this. So my husband and I stayed up pretty late the other night, binging a show. We finally decided to head to bed. I went upstairs, closed the bedroom door and turned the fan on, then laid my head down while he headed to the kitchen to fill up his water bottle. And the second that I laid my head down, I heard what can only be described as a demonic, something out of a horror movie, scream coming from downstairs. I was frozen in fear for a moment, then decided to text my husband and ask if he heard it too. He immediately texted me at the same time to confirm that he had heard it, and as soon as he did, he bolted to the living room to check on our 2-year-old daughter, as she had fallen asleep on the couch, to find her passed out, mouth open and snoring. So we know that it couldn't have come from her. Not that she could make that kind of a sound to begin with, but we were just trying to make sense of it. But it did come from our living room, that much was clear. I sort of feel actually insane explaining it because it felt like something that only happens in horror movies. I mean, I've never experienced this before. We live in the city and it was -35 that night, so we definitely had all of our windows shut. The sound didn't come from outside, in other words. We ruled out any animal noises as we don't have a ton of foxes in the areas, and let alone in the city. Our home is 114 years old, and right across the back alley from a funeral home, selling point for us. And when we first moved in, our neighbors and a few others had stated that the house was haunted, but in the past 2 years that we've lived here, we've never experienced anything terrifying. I mean, the odd shadow figure in our peripherals, sounds that could be easily chalked up to our cats. Sleep paralysis has frequented me more often, but as for paranormal activity, I wouldn't confirm our house is necessarily haunted. It hasn't happened since. We're both extremely confused and honestly slightly terrified as well. I did smudge our home heavily the next morning, windows open and let out the stagnant energy. But does anyone have any ideas of what this could have possibly been, if not a terrifying paranormal event? My family has houses both in Mexico and Texas, so I alternate between the US and Mexico very frequently. On normal weeks, I just cross the border from Mexico to Texas to go to school, and then I come back to Mexico. I spend most of my time in Mexico, so naturally I'm quite used to cartel presence and all that. I'm used to calling off nights out with friends due to cartel-related shootings and stuff like that. It just no longer surprises me, I guess. It wasn't until I had an actual face-to-face encounter with the cartel, though, that things changed. My ex-girlfriend lives in Mexico, in a gated neighborhood on the wealthier side of the city. Naturally, I used to frequent her house when we were still together, and one night her parents left her and her little brother alone until the next day, so she invited me over and we got pretty hammered. Around 2 a.m. we went out for a walk because we wanted to smoke a bit, stuff from Texas, and we sat on the bleachers of a basketball court within our neighborhood. It was behind a very, very beautiful house with expensive cars parked outside, and I asked her, what do they do? To which she replied in Mexican, a slang for cartel. I thought that she was joking until she told me how the Mexican army had their whole neighborhood on lockdown because of them back in 2014. My smile faded quickly. I got kind of mad and worried, and I asked her what the heck are we doing behind a cartel safe house at like 2 a.m. smoking. This all happened quickly, and after 5 minutes of being there, a tall white pickup truck parked in front of the court. I immediately knew that this was not good news, and I kept telling her that we need to leave. She told me to calm down and that it was probably just some kids making out in the truck. That seemed reasonable enough to me, but I started panicking after the truck just stayed there for like 5 minutes without turning off the engine, and as soon as we got up to leave, it took off. As we made our way to the other street, the huge weight that was lifted from my shoulders fell right back twice as heavy when the truck intercepted us at the very corner of that street. She ran into a house that was still in construction. She tried to pull me in with her, but I didn't budge because something I've learned from my dad being a cop is that you never run if you have nothing to hide. She had weed on her and I didn't, so I just stood there for a bit until the window of the driver's side went down and a man signaled me to step closer, and so I did. As I walked up, the first thing that I saw was both of the men in there were armed, and this definitely made my stomach drop. The passenger looked completely out of his mind you, like he genuinely looked unhinged. His pupils were huge, and he was clearly on something. On the other hand, the driver looked pretty normal. I dare say he was really normal, in fact, and that much was comforting. He asked me, this whole conversation was in Spanish, of course, but he said, "What are we doing?" I said, "Smoking," and he asked, "Smoking what?" I just said normal cigarettes, and he turned to look at his partner and back at me, and there was a long pause before I said, "I don't know who you're looking for, but it's definitely not us. I mean, I'm not even from here." He asked me if I was American, to which I nodded, and then he said to show me. Fortunately, I always carry my passport with me since I cross the border so often. He asked me about my girlfriend, and I said that she was American too. She's not, though. And he told me to go and get her, and I told him that I would rather not because if they found weed on her, well, that wasn't hers at least, she would be in a lot of trouble. Fortunately, the guy didn't insist, and after going through my phone, he told me that he didn't want to see us out this late behind that house ever again. They then took off, and I turned back to her, who was peeking from behind a pile of cement bags. I signaled her that we were leaving, and we quickly ran back to her house. When we got to her front yard, I asked her to give me the weed so that I could get rid of it, and she told me that she hid it under the floorboards of that house, so we ran back to get it because if they found it there, we would be in a lot of trouble. The 2 minutes that it took for us to run back to her house, that was easily the scariest moments that I've ever experienced. What still makes my stomach turn to date, though, is the look the other guy had on his face. I'm telling you that he looked absolutely unhinged. He didn't say a single thing, but he was staring me down the whole time with his hand around the grip of the rifle. Honestly, I felt like he was just itching for me to say the wrong thing so that he could officially blow my brains right out then and there. Shortly after moving into our home, we started experiencing paranormal activities, I guess you could call it. Our house is not old by any means. It was built in 2010, so it has very little history. Most of the things that happened would happen at night, though. Things like voices and really hard slams against the walls. I'm not talking about the house settling. I mean, it would sound like a football player hit the walls at full force. On 2 separate occasions, we came out of our room in the morning and all of the pictures on the walls were now on the ground. Mind you, these are 4 pictures on different walls. Both my mother and friend spent the night on our couch once and said that someone was walking around the house all night waking them up, and they honestly thought that it was me. But I was in my own room all night and I have prosthetic legs, so it definitely wasn't me sleepwalking. Lights turn off and on for no reason, and lastly, the one that bothered me the most. My son was 5 years old and would often talk to an imaginary friend that he called the cowboy. These weren't one-sided conversations, mind you. I would listen in while he was in his room and he would pause to reply. There were normal breaks that you would have as if they were going back and forth. I once asked my son where the cowboy came from and he said he followed us from Arizona. My in-laws live in Phoenix, we live in California. We visit twice a year normally. I befriended my neighbor who is an old lady that happens to write metaphysical books for a living. I helped her with some chores mowing her lawn and stuff like that. And after finding this out, I jokingly told her about our situation, and she said that she would take care of it. Weirdly too, we stopped having problems after that. My son said the cowboy came to him and allegedly told him goodbye. So 6 years ago, I was homeless. It was just me and my cat in the woods. I used to live in this wooded area that over the years had a lot of suicides via jumping off of cliffs that led to the ocean, and a lot of OD or murders of homeless people even in the past. It's all craggy cliffs with a thicket of trees and high bushes. A lot of people like to hike through there. Now, I know it sounds like a horror movie setup, and you're absolutely right, but I don't scare easy, and I wanted privacy for me and my cat. So one night I woke up at around 3 in the morning, from what I would guess about maybe 100 feet away. I heard this really beautiful singing. I woke up from it. I mean, it was very strange in how faint it was, but it woke me up instantly. And out of nowhere the singing stops. I'm in my tent with my knife drawn just to be sure, and it's 3 in the morning after all. Without hearing any footsteps, which would be impossible for my surroundings, I heard a woman's voice inches from my tent. She said, "Is he awake?" I vocally say, "What the heck?" and leap out of my tent with my knife. It took me about 5 seconds. I got out and there was no one there, not even a hint of anybody. I had my light on, wide awake, and there was nothing. Well, after a cigarette and standing out there for a few minutes, eventually I went back to bed. That was the only real spooky thing that has ever happened there. Some small things here and there, but never, ever before sunset, and anything like that. So this happened years ago, but I'm now recollecting bits and pieces from that event and am thankful to be sane and safe. I'm honestly just airing it out so I can get input or opinions, because really I just don't know what to make of it. I'll preface this by saying that this happened a while ago, back in 2019 when I was 16 years old, hence I was very naive and quite gullible. I'm aware that it might not be a human trafficking case, but it does seem suspicious regardless. So, for context, this happened in a relatively large North American city. It was late December, a few days before Christmas. I had just finished hanging out with my friends and was using public transit, the subway, to get back home. My friends lived in a different area, so I had to travel back alone in that direction. The subway wagons were mostly empty. It was already dark out. I recall it being around maybe 8 to 9 p.m. I was sitting on an individual seat where the setup was structured in a way that had another seat perpendicular to my current one, which was empty. This one guy, who looked to be relatively young, plopped down on the adjacent seat and greeted me with a smile instantly. I didn't think too much of it at the time since, in all honesty, I thought that he was pretty cute. Physically, he had a middle part, chestnut hair, was relatively tall and very slim, nice facial features too. I don't remember his face in a very detailed manner, but I remember thinking that he was really cute. He was dressed in a sweater and jeans, didn't look disheveled or overly casual either. Upon sitting down, he greeted me smiling, presented himself and shared his name. We then started making small talk, and he brought up the fact that he had finished university, which made me ask for his age. He claimed to be 24, which seemed to match with his appearance. What really creeps me out, though, is his response. I told him that I was 16 years old, and he didn't even seem slightly fazed by that. Matter of fact, he was smirking and had formed a small visible grin, talking about how he missed being this young and advising me to stay in school. He proceeded with asking me about what I was doing alone in the metro, my plans before that, and if I had any plans coming up in the next few hours, to which I stupidly answered no. He then started expressing how his friends had come up with this supposed dare where he had to bring a random girl over, a complete stranger, to their party or hangout by accosting them randomly, such as this very occasion. I remember at the time finding it hard to believe, so I insisted on going home about a handful of times, to which he started pleading with me, claiming that it would be fun and if I were to be uncomfortable, it would bring me right back to the subway station. I kept insisting that my mum would get mad, and I asked him if there was another day where we could do that, but he answered that it was a one-time thing, that it's a very uncommon gathering, that he hasn't seen these friends in a long time, and wouldn't see them after the event most probably, because of a full schedule and all that. He also kept pushing the fact that he wouldn't keep me up for long, and so I eventually gave in. I know, super stupid. I still can't believe it to this day, in fact. Well, we had gone through a few subway stations and got off in a pretty desolate area, which was known for its drug use, prostitution, and poverty. But to be frank, I didn't know that at the time, although it was pretty obvious looking back. That specific neighborhood still has a pretty tarnished reputation to this day, mind you. But anyway, the guy, his name was Ben, then revealed his real name to be different than the one that he initially had given me, and was seemingly Slavic. The name that he revealed, though, is most likely also fake, to be honest, but he then started asking me pretty intrusive questions, such as, what are your darkest secrets? What's your home life like? What's stressing you out right now? Why did you decide to come along? He claimed to like getting to know people beyond the surface level, hence why he was being so intrusive. I was a straight A student at the time, so I simply told him that studies were my main concern as of now, to which he answered that there had to be more than that. We had been about 15 minutes in at this point when a car slowed down next to us and rolled its windows down. A man let out a "hey," but was immediately shooed away by Ben. Ben then told me that the man was supposedly John, which I didn't know who that was, but apparently he was the driver and essentially a client in some sort of sense. I was definitely starting to get wary about this, but still made it to the hangout a few minutes later, which was located in a regular townhouse. It wasn't like worn down or anything is what I'm getting at. I was greeted by maybe 5 to 6 dudes who were seemingly over 25. 2 of them looked above 30 as well. They all stared me down and immediately asked how old I was. I told them that I was 16. One of the guys seemed sort of phased and let out a, "Come on man, that's my sister's age. They might even be in the same high school." They all kind of laughed it off and moved on. They never spoke about it again and barely asked me any questions, except for, "How did you guys meet?" Also, it was obvious that someone's dad owned that place, as there was an old man dozing off on the couch. We were all gathered around a dinner table. The host served me some food along with the other guests, but I refused to eat as I was honestly starting to feel a bit queasy about the situation. After everyone, except me, finished eating, we all went upstairs. Ben started playing the guitar and another man joined in by playing some keys on the piano. They then asked me to film them using Ben's phone, so I did. And when this was going on, this was when I honestly started getting really terrible vibes and felt the need to leave immediately. So I put the phone down and slowly made my way through the frame of the door. One of the older guys was standing near it and asked me what was up and if I was enjoying their company. We started talking for a minute and he claimed to be an accountant. He then started leaning in and tried to slightly hover over me against the door frame. However, I stepped back into the staircase and made it to the front door, opened it, and went out to the driveway. Luckily, the door wasn't locked. Ben followed and asked me if I wanted to leave. I immediately said yes, and this time he didn't insist on bringing me back in. I should also add that right before leaving, I had told Ben that my mum was relentlessly calling me and was worried, to which he obliged. On our way back, he proceeded to ask me if I was genuinely 16 and not below that. He told me that if he were my dad, he would never let me out of my sight again, because what I just did, which was going to the party in the first place, was the dumbest thing that he had ever seen any girl do, especially since I had no reason to do that, according to him. Once he accompanied me back to the subway station, I asked for his Snapchat. I was a complete moron, I know, or any type of social media that he had, and he told me that he doesn't use a phone like that and was apparently fully off-grid. I went back home and after that I never heard from him again. Now, although I didn't get harassed or violence or there were any sexual endeavors or anything like that, and it's a pretty outdated happening, I'm genuinely scared that I could have potentially been trafficked or something. I want to know if there's any way that I could leave an anonymous tip to the city or something as well. I was searching through public records, but I couldn't find anything. But what do you guys think about all of this? Also, I should probably mention that I was the only girl there. Like I mentioned earlier, Ben had said previously that apparently all the guys were bringing girls to this place, but I can assure you that there were no other girls anywhere in sight.